Tonight's guest on Set the Trend Live.
Nadine Drummond, Krista Farrell, Atta Acholi, Sarah Ann Filson, Hamish Mohammed.
And now, here come your hosts.
Welcome back, lads. Welcome back. Lovely to see you back. I really
What's happening, Mr. Vibes the Duke? Sorry, just getting the name right.
I really do miss you guys. I really do, mate.
Really?
Love and all that. You know what I'm saying to you? Welcome to Set the Trend podcast. Your boys are back in the building. Reggie, Eastender, and myself. And this is, of course, where we discuss street sounds, everything to do with street sounds, culture, and the history. Today, although we're going to be discussing about COVID-19 and the vaccine, but before we get there, good evening, Prue. How you doing? But before we get there, Reggie Styles, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Pretty good. I've bought my One Love lottery ticket, just in case, trying to find one step closer to paradise, hence why the background, one step closer to the road of paradise.
I'm just wondering, will you give me some of your dosh if you win? Because we're kind of like partners, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, of course. Oh, come on. Of course, man. I'll buy you a burger. Oh, yeah, you don't eat burgers. Sorry. I'll get you
a burger then, yeah?
A nice vegan piece
gourmet
of bacon.
burger, yeah? A gourmet burger.
Vegan bacon, actually.
Okay. So, you're cool, yeah? You're all right?
Yeah. I'm all good, thank you.
All right, cool. Eastender, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Tomorrow is, the clocks go forward tonight. Tomorrow is the first day of British summertime. Nothing better than London when the sun is shining and the evenings are bright. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Bro, I don't know if you ain't noticed for the past year, but we're in lockdown. Yeah, don't mean anything, British summertime.
Yeah, you know what?
I mean,
you got to make the most of it.
I'm supposed to be a humbug, but
you got to make the most of it.
We're not getting the fullness out of it. You get me? You know what I'm saying? They're just waking us up early for nothing.
I have to say, the Duke has been a bit bar humbug for a couple of weeks, to be honest. I've noticed that.
Watch,
really?
I'm drinking my tea. You shouldn't say things like that. I may spit out all my tea, and that'd be kind of embarrassing, Reggie. Don't do that. Yes, we've got quite a fun-filled show today. This one is the part 2 to the part 1 that we did about 5 weeks ago about the coronavirus. This one we're talking about, now they've had the data through how safe it is to take the vaccine or not. So we'll be discussing that with our doctors, and we've got 2 further doctors that will be joining us on specialities in their field as well, in data and also to do with the virus itself, and specifically to do with Black people. So we'll be having that because, as you know, Black people are really hesitant to take up the jab, to take up the vaccine. So we'll be talking that. And I'm going to say this once, I'm going to say it again before they come on. We haven't personally got a view, set the trend, but what we want you to do is have the information instead of it going around in WhatsApp groups, or your best friend said, my mum said, the auntie said, from there, said wherever, that you're not supposed to be doing this. So what we want to do is make it a conversation tonight. So we do want your questions coming through tonight, not ours to be asked all the time. We do want a lot of you participating, asking your questions. I've had questions that have been sent in from some people, some of the audience already, which I'll be talking about. So we'll be talking about that. So it's really your show tonight. So we want you to give us as much questions as possible. Reggie's going to be taking the questions and be asking them on your behalf in the chat, whether on YouTube or whether you're on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, if you could just share the link for us, please, one time, if you can just do that for us. And if you're on YouTube, copy and share the link and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. So, because we're trying to make sure that we get up the numbers on the YouTube channel. So there we have it about coronavirus. We'll be talking about that in a bit more. Let's talk about last week's show. Recap. Reggie, last week's show. Last week's show featured the Dark Destroyer himself.
The fake Raver.
Sean Wallace. No, he's not a fake raver.
I'm not a fake
He's not a
raver.
fake raver. He just didn't know that Body Fusion was recorded by Starview. That's all.
No, just didn't know that.
But he knew the words and he knew the lyrics and he knew the beat and he done a little a cappella, didn't he? Just to say, yeah.
It was really good. It was really good. It was impressive. It was great having him on, and having Quincy on as well, which is
yeah, we had Quincy
really
on as well, and that was good. And to close the show, we also had the ladylike EastEnder, your friend,
Miss Sherry Brown.
People were going crazy over that one.
Nice, vibrant, beautiful smile, beautiful background, real background, not a virtual background, real background.
You're taking a swipe at me, mate. Remember, we're in lockdown. Don't worry. In the summer, you get to. I don't know if you're nice, you might get to see my lovely uncouthed garden.
Okay.
I must say though, Sean Wallace, if you don't know Sean and you only know Sean from being a barrister and being on the chase, you probably look at him and think, he's one of them. You know what I mean?
He's one of them.
You know what I mean? And in terms of, I think more class-wise, more than color, because you can see he's black. I mean, that is given. I think more class-wise, you think you couldn't connect with him because class-wise, he's just, he just doesn't dwell with us lot. You know what I mean? And just to hear some of his stories from the RJS days as well. He did the first ever RJS Holidays leaflet. He was the content writer for that. And just to share some of the memories that he shared along the way. I think that was I think that was excellent. I thoroughly enjoyed that journey.
Yeah. And I think he's also fortunate. Like he's one of us as well. I know we might think he's not one of us, but he's one of us.
One of us. I definitely enjoyed it. And we've got more to come. We're going to tell you about what's coming on very soon, but not yet. Not yet. We're going to tell you about next week and the week after. We haven't got the design for the week after, but I want to tell you about our special guest for the week after. But we will talk about that in a minute. Right, who should I go to this topic with? I'm not, because if I go to who I want to go to, I'll get him in trouble. So, EastEnder, Derek Jackson.
Yes.
What's all this about? Quickly, because we haven't got that much time.
I'm not even sure what it's about. Yeah. All I remember, I was doing my Facebook live show, and it was like I was into my show, and I just got this mad phone call. Ask your audience if you know who Jackson is, and I'm like, no, I don't know. You're setting me up. So I'm not doing it. And then I put the phone, and then I did Google it, and then I said, no. He tried to set me up there.
I didn't. And thank you, Pamela, for doing that as well. Reggie, do you want to describe who Derek Jackson is for people who don't know and actually tell us what?
So Derek Jackson is one of these empowerment coaches. He gives advice to the limited knowledge that I do have. He gives advice to women who are and men, and very favorably tells the so-called secrets of how ladies can keep a male and how they can find the right male partner. And he's very well revered. He's made a lot of money from it. Coaches like that, they make a lot of money. And then he was caught cheating on his wife, and that's basically what happened. So, people have kind of it's in two camps. Some people respect his hustle and the fact that he's made so much money from basically finessing people, by giving them all this advice. But behind the closed doors, as per usual, he was cheating himself. So,
wow. It's one of them.
And he made money. Yeah, and he made money on books, didn't he? Anyway, let's not dwell on him too much.
Okay.
Dr. Scholler had a conversation with Naomi Campbell this week. Dr. Scholler, Piers Morgan slayer.
Very good.
Dr. Scholler.
Very, very good to see two strong black women conversing with each other. Again, I've got to watch all of it to get the full context of what they were speaking about. But just the fact that Naomi and Shola, Dr. Shola, both from South London, so they were bonding just on their South London status, and talking about the Piers Morgan situation. She also said that Naomi also said that she also had a go at Piers once in her career in conversations with him, and she was just congratulating her on the way Shola treated and spoke to Piers and dealt with him. If you haven't had a chance to see that, I think you should go on what's it? It was on
It's on
Naomi's
YouTube.
channel. Yeah.
Yeah, she's
You
got
don't
her
mess
own
with
kind of like
doctors.
podcast. Everybody's at it now. I think we inspired her.
You don't mess with the doctors, do you?
No, you don't.
We got T Winter. Thank you. Cheers.
Right. Before we go into address that someone's got a nomination on the panel, let's talk about and let's mention there's 2 memorials. One went on last night, which was for Mikey Simpson, who died about a year today. And they're having their memorials for him. Mikey Simpson, originally from Rock to Rock, used to be before the Breakfast Connector, so he was on from 6 to 8 or something like that, and then Tony would take it on. But Mikey Simpson, he later on resurrected Rock to Rock again. And he was one of the founder members of it later on down the line.
And if you want to hear more information about Rock to Rock and some of the stories of Mikey, we actually spoke to Tony P. Our podcast is up. I think it was season 1 or season 2.
Season 1. Yeah. Tony P, the
So,
Breakfast Connector, one of the former founders of Rock to Rock Radio.
and big up Jackie, his sister.
And also tonight there's a memorial for Mr. Fox from Lightning Radio as well. So there's a lot of raving on tonight, and they'll be doing his memorial tonight. So after you're finished, you can go on and pop on and rave till the morning, till about.
Big up Fox. Rest in peace, my friend, my brother.
Family, we all say rest in peace, gone but never forgotten.
Indeed.
Salute.
Right. So if you're on Facebook and you've joined us, welcome. Just subscribe to our Facebook page. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to that page as well. Yes, there's a nomination on the panel. Who's been nominated?
Well done to our very own Duke of South London, Mr. Sweet Vibes. He's been nominated for your Breakfast Blues, the Sunday show has been doing. Has been nominated for a Groundbreaking Awards. So big up to the guys at Groundbreaking, and congratulations to you, Mr. Duke. Well done to you. I noticed that the trend didn't get nominated in the podcast section, though.
That's cool.
It's
all right.
What that's about. That's criminal.
That's
criminal.
I mean,
can I just say before we go, congratulations to everybody that has been nominated in that section, and also everybody who's been nominated across the board too.
Yeah, congratulations. How did you feel when you saw the nomination, when you got it?
I was like, okay. I'm like, okay. Yeah, it's nice being nominated. It's nice.
There's a lot of strong competition in there.
Yeah.
Are you that happy? Are you that happy to be nominated guy, or do you want to, or are you that one that said, I want to win? Because I haven't really seen you. It's a voting award, and I haven't seen you post about vote for me. I haven't seen you do that yet.
Confidence, mate. Come on, you can do it.
Anyway. Yeah.
So I'll mobilize my African team in Sierra Leone to vote.
Go and vote for everybody. Vote for me and vote for whoever you think has entertained.
No, let's vote for Ray. We want you to win it, mate. Come on. We need.
Cool. I've won already, bro. This is how I see awards. You know what I mean? So especially when you get nominated and people recognize what you've done and what you've put out there, you've won already. So whether or not you win there, it's cool because we play the long game and we're winning out there on a whole heap of other stuff. So let's not forget that. Before we turn our attentions to everything COVID, we were supposed to do a poll, wasn't we? And I haven't done it, so we're gonna sort that out in a minute. We're gonna do a sort of poll. So remind me, gents. And lastly, we must talk about the show that we've got to do next week.
Yeah.
Producers, is there? Oh, there we have it. There we have it. Right. So let me, DJ Spoonie. What can I say that you don't already know about DJ Spoonie? He's been doing Spoonie's house. He's been doing it over the lockdown, Black Excellence. But we're also going to talk about some stuff you may not know, like how we booked Mystery to DJ at a gig when he was 16 or 17, or like how we used to play in Maxims back in the day,
Yeah.
or his sound system that he had with one of our former guests. And he wears a flat cap better than me. He wears a flat cap better than any of us.
Jay Blades.
Jay Blades from the Repair Shop, how he was in a sound with Jay Blades. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and obviously about the garage and everything else. So he's our guest next week. So we'll be talking about his street sound connection next week. And also Carol Glenn, she's founder and CEO of Motor Racing's Next Generation Racing. So we want another Lewis Hamilton, and Carol is the girl that's going to get us another Lewis Hamilton. So she'll be in the building next week, and we'll be talking to her about how, why, where, how can we get connected, and how can we help her promote that to the next Lewis Hamilton. And also, let's not forget Mr. I Want You Back, Sinclair, one of the biggest tunes in the 90s. He will be here performing that hit track to end the show off next week, Saturday, the 3rd of April. April already.
Sinclair, oh my God. Wow.
You know what I mean?
I'm looking
So,
forward to that one. I always
next
play his
week.
tunes.
Yep, that's next week. So we're looking forward to that. And also the week after, we're looking forward to that as well, because if you're an old-time sound boy just like myself, and believe me, you know what I mean, it gets no better than this, actually. We have Rory from Stone Love in the building, and he don't give much interviews. He doesn't give much interviews at all. At all. But he's giving one for Set the Trend podcast, and we'll be talking to Rory Stone Love about his connection with street sounds. So that will be very, very interesting. You don't want to miss that.
And we're going to make sure that Reggie does the Stone Love impersonation, his intro. How's it go, Reggie?
So, So we'll be talking to Rory Stone Love next week, and then I do believe the week after that we have DJ Elaine in the building, and we'll be talking to DJ Elaine from LWR originally. So we've got the females in the building. She will be in there, and we'll be talking to her about her history and connection. And not forgetting as well, I think this is the very important one as well for the culture, known as Cute Guy, or to some of us, we know him as Nathan. Yeah. Many of you would know him as the voice of a whole load of dances and raves over the last 20 odd years. Nathan, who's the voice of the adverts, so he's the guy that you hear on most of the adverts. He's one of the guys that you hear most of the adverts. He will be in the building, and we'll be talking to him about his connection and his input into street sounds culture as well.
Oh, so White Cocoa. Go check it out. It's going to be big.
So those are the next 3 weeks. Done and dusted. You know what I'm saying to you? So we look forward to that. Right. COVID.
Hey.
My days. The vaccine. To take vaccine or to not take the vaccine. I'm looking forward to this conversation. When we had part 1 conversation, it was very enlightening for me. Please, the audience in the chat rooms, this is your moment for you to question the doctors that we have here. Please take it, if you have something that you're not sure of, if you have something that you want to ask that you don't understand, now is your moment to do that. You can question the efficacy of the vaccine. You can question the point of the vaccine. We'll be here. We've got statistics to give you, so you can go away and make your own informed choice as to whether or not the vaccine is for you or not. So this is not information going around in WhatsApp groups. You know what I mean? It's not spurious conspiracy theories. You get a chance today to interrogate the data and to talk to the clinicians about real life, because our clinicians are on the front line of it. They're facing it. They're Black doctors, even more so when Black people are in the lowest group, I think, for putting themselves forward to get a vaccination. So we'll be discussing that today. Reggie, we'll talk to you more because it looks like you've been vaccinated. So we will talk to you a bit more about that. So I'm going to invite them on one by one. So let's start with Dr. Atta Acholi, please. Can we have Dr. Atta Acholi to the platform? How are you, sir?
Hello, I'm very well, sir. How you gents doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. Are you looking forward to today's show?
Definitely. It's a ripe honor to be here. Thanks for having us again.
Welcome back.
And welcome back. And just before we go and invite your guests in, what I want to do is introduce you first. So instead of having everybody on screen at one time, we introduce you one by one. Can you give us a bit of background into your specialism and what your contribution will be tonight?
So I work as a children's doctor, pediatric gastroenterologist in South London. So we've been quite lucky that I guess children have not been at the forefront of the main COVID problems. But of course, children are the children of parents who are old. And I think obviously as a parent myself, a black man, a black doctor, you think through all these things. You got relatives and friends who are in these high risk groups and people having to think through the vaccine. So I've done my own reading, my own thinking. You've had to do lots of this conversation. So I'm hoping to at least bring a different view. I'm not a frontline COVID worker per se, but you are there in the hospital, but I can at least bring some of those flows in the conversations I've had, both professionally and personally.
Thank you. Can we also bring Dr. Krista Farrell to Set the Trend podcast, please? Hey. How are you, Dr. Krista?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having us back.
Nice to have you back on our screen.
That's fine. And I said, you know what? I didn't see that last time. You play the guitar, do you?
My husband does.
What a way to get serenaded. Hey, look at that. So, Dr. Krista, can you tell us about yourself and what you hope to bring to the contribution, what your contribution will be tonight?
Yeah, so I'm a consultant neurologist. So that's brains and spinal cords and nerves, basically my specialty. And I'm here similarly to Atta, because I'm a Black woman, obviously, and the whole trend throughout the pandemic and how COVID has affected our community obviously has been very disturbing. So having spent a huge amount of time reading about COVID, having been redeployed onto COVID wards, volunteering for vaccination, etc., this obviously is a great opportunity to try and bring some of that knowledge, I think, directly to our community. So thank you so much for having us and giving us this platform.
Thank you so much for coming on. Okay, can we invite so in fact, Dr. Krista was here last time as well, so it's a welcome back again. We have two new doctors that are coming onto the program today. Can we introduce Dr. Sarah Ann Filson, please, to Set the Trend podcast? How are you?
Hi, good evening all.
How are you, Sarah?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. It's very lovely to see you all.
Thank you. Thank you for giving up your time and coming to be part of the broadcast today. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself and what you hope to contribute to the platform tonight?
Sure, yeah. So I'm actually an infectious diseases doctor. That's my specialty. So COVID is one of the infections that obviously I've been quite heavily involved in. I've worked on the wards specifically at Norfolk Park in northwest London during the last year. I'm also a microbiologist. So I also work in the lab, so currently working at West Middlesex Hospital. Disclaimer, I have been involved in the trials. So I was involved in the recovery trial, which looked at different treatments for COVID on the wards. And I was also involved with the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine trial at Norfolk Park. And so I'm smiling like that because I know people have a lot of questions and I'm ready for them. One of the other things I do as well is I'm a trustee for the Royal Society of Medicine. And quite early on in the pandemic, we did a webinar where we talked about the disproportionate effect of COVID on our community and communities like ours. So yeah, I'm ready for this conversation. I'm really looking forward to the discussion this evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah's fine.
And our last doctor, can we bring Dr. Hamish Mohammed to Set the Trend podcast, please?
Good evening, gents, and good evening, everyone. Just to say off the bat, thank you very much for inviting me to join the panel. So my name is Hamish Mohammed. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist at Public Health England, and over the past year, I've worked as a consultant epidemiologist. My focus is on sexual health primarily, but I, like many others in Public Health England, have been redeployed to support the national COVID-19 response. And as part of that duty, I've been part of that team that's been reporting the daily number of COVID-19 cases, the daily number of deaths after COVID-19 test. And it's like others have alluded to, it's been quite sobering because the impact is felt heaviest in our communities, in Black and brown communities in the UK. So it's really important to be here. I'm here to answer any questions around the data and the trends that we're seeing in COVID-19.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to set the trend, Dr. Hamish. Thank you very much. Last but most definitely not least, one of the people who put this all together and made this happen. It's not just set the trend. We wish we knew such influential people, but one of the people that's helped put this all together is journalist Nadine Drummond. Can you bring her to the stage? Hey.
Hi,
Good evening,
everybody.
Nadine.
It's so nice to see you all again. Thank you
How are
for
you?
having us back. I'm good. It's warming up. The sun's out. It didn't rain today. I was able to hang out my clothes when I washed them and they didn't get wet. So it was a good day. It was a good day.
So Nadine, what will you be bringing to the podcast tonight?
Well, first of all, I just want to say to Reggie, you were flinging words on me when you were talking about Darren Jackson. So don't think I'm not going to call you on it. But that's one thing.
No. What are you talking about?
No, you can't fling words, right? Because remember, we all live in glass house. Don't.
I didn't even mention your name.
You didn't have to. Anyway, so apart from my good humour, what I'll be bringing this evening is the advocacy that we do as the Cambridge University African and Caribbean Alumni Society within our communities. And what we seek to do is add value and get in where we fit in. And as doctors and other professionals, we realized that there was a dearth of information in our communities, that we believed that we were not being treated fairly or perhaps ignored somewhat by the government and their response to COVID. And then we just decided that we should use the expertise and the skills that we have to try and make a difference. And as Ray had said earlier, the podcast doesn't have a particular view as to whether people should get the vaccine or not get the vaccine. But what we are agreed on is that we need to create a space where people can come and meet people that look like them, that sound like them, that have the same interests as them, where they can access information needed for them to make informed decisions. So I will also be checking everybody, especially Reggie, when you say things that might not be accurate.
Thank you for...
Which might be accurate or that can have to be put in a different kind of context.
Thank you for coming and being part of the show tonight. Right, chat room. Let's just get a couple things right, centered, straight and centered from the off. We're trying to do this podcast in sections because I think if we just take questions from you ad hoc, we'll be repeating ourselves and going over things. So what we're going to try and do is the first topic. I'm going to tell you all the topics, and then I'm going to go back to the topic that we're going to be dealing with from the beginning. We're going to try and deal with the vaccine trial process, should I say, which includes the vaccine trial data. We're going to then move on to the vaccine's composition and what it has in it. We're going to then move on to the disparities and the different vaccines that are out there. We're going to talk about the herbalism, traditional medicine versus vaccine, and lifestyle and health conditions, and also the impact the vaccine has on fertility and vaccine side effects. So we're going to try and do it in that kind of order. We're going to try. We know some things might overlap, but we will try. Before I start, I just want to give you guys some numbers out there. 12 months since we entered into lockdown because of this COVID-19. 3 national lockdowns in England covering more than half of the year. 4.4 million confirmed COVID-19 cases in the UK. 127,000 officially recorded COVID-19 deaths. UK deaths in 2020 exceeded the 5-year average by 7.2%. Over 30 million vaccine doses administered across the UK by the 22nd of March. 360,000 people unemployed in January compared to the year earlier. 11.2 million furloughed employees. 352 billion allocated to financial support for workers, businesses, and public services because of COVID-19. With very strong views on both sides, from vaxxers to anti-vaxxers, we intend to give you that information today for you to make your own informed choice. So please, in the chat group, that's where we're at to today. So we're going to try and deal with your questions. We're going to try and deal with the vaccine trial process first. Before we start, can I ask Dr. Sarah if she can just tell us briefly the vaccines that are out there for us to be vaccinated? Because I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3 out there at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So within the UK, we've done actually very well in terms of vaccinations. We were quick to register the initial available vaccines, and we've been very good in regards to rollout of vaccines. And I think that's partially because the NHS was so heavily involved in the rollout of vaccines. In terms of vaccines currently available and approved in the UK, there are 2 different types of vaccines. So the mRNA vaccine, specifically the Pfizer vaccine, and then the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is a viral vector vaccine. I think actually also the Moderna vaccine is approved here. If I'm right, somebody correct me on that, I can't remember. But actually isn't really particularly rolled out. So the vaccines you will be offered if you are offered a vaccine is either the Pfizer vaccine or the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And there are other vaccines in the pipeline. There are loads of vaccines actually in development, which is great. But probably more than likely in the next couple of months, we will see the Johnson & Johnson vaccine approved and also the Novavax vaccine approved. So I think it's important to note that these vaccines work on different platform technologies, but actually they all have the same kind of antigen. So what I mean by antigen is the way a vaccine works is it primes your immune system to make antibodies in order that if you come across a infection, whether it be with a specific virus or bacteria, again, your body already recognizes it and therefore produces protective antibodies. So the Pfizer vaccine is a short genetic sequence which codes for the spike protein, and the Oxford, great graphic, and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine also has the spike protein within it, but it's delivered on a viral vector, which is a harmless virus that allows the spike protein to be presented to the body. The important thing to note about the spike protein, so you guys by the end of this will be virus and vaccine experts, I hope. The spike protein is essentially the key. So it allows the virus itself to enter cells. It's the main reason why coronaviruses are called coronaviruses is because they're spike proteins that you see on the outside of the virus itself. And so that's what the spike protein is. And those are the vaccines that are currently available.
Cool. So, Dr. Sarah, in terms of, if we stick to the 2 vaccines first, then Oxford and AstraZeneca, which one, because I had a discussion in the week, one you would, if you're out in the community, you're more likely to be given one type, or if you go to the hospital, you're more likely to be given one type. Can you break that down? Why you would, if you're out in the community, why you would be more likely to get one more than the other?
So that's a very good distinction. And one of the main reasons for this is the way in which the vaccines are stored. So the mRNA vaccines, because of the way in which they're made and their stability, they need to be stored at a very, very low temperature. I'm talking like I think it's minus 60, minus 80. Whereas the AstraZeneca vaccines can be stored in normal fridges, which means that they can then be dispersed to GPs, pharmacists, etc., around the community, which means that they can quite easily be administered in kind of your general healthcare settings. Whereas in order to store the Pfizer vaccine, you need a special fridge, which generally only massive hospitals or research institutes, etc., would have. So that's one of the main reasons why there's that distinction.
So if you're out in the community, you're more likely to get the Oxford AstraZeneca one, and if you go to the hospital, you're more likely to get the Pfizer vaccine. Is that?
It's a broad, yeah, exactly that.
Okay. Right. So let's get on. And we'll keep you there because one of the first questions we got is a vaccine. You know, is about the vaccine trial process. If I could kick it off, what vaccines, as far as we know, usually take 3 years, 5 years, 6 to 7 years. What was so special about these vaccines that now they could be done in a matter of months?
I love this question because it's a good question which highlights what we can do as human beings when we really put our mind to things. So the first thing to say about these trials is that no corners have been cut. And I know when I say that, people will be like, well, that's ridiculous because it normally takes years and years for vaccines or anything to be approved. And one of the main reasons for that actually is because of all of the regulatory hurdles, but also the funding and the money that goes into vaccination. So let me talk you a little bit through the trial process. So there are a number of different steps of the trial process. The first one being the preclinical and the kind of lab-based investigations that go into place. So the important thing to note about SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, is that although it is a novel virus for us, it's actually similar to other coronaviruses that we've previously come into contact with, specifically MERS and SARS, hence why it's SARS-CoV-2. And what this means is that actually a lot of the preclinical work for these types of vaccines were already done. So as soon as they had the genetic code back in January, they were able to quite quickly move from preclinical into clinical studies. So now let me talk about clinical studies. Clinical studies are broken up into different parts. First phase, second phase, third phase. And these phases are very important and often actually run one after another, and mainly because of the amount of money that goes into research and development, but also because of the process and the time it takes to recruit people. The phase 1 studies are generally relatively small studies, so they might have kind of tens of people. The phase 2 studies are slightly bigger because the phase 1 study mainly looks at safety, and the phase 2 study essentially looks at kind of dosing and starts to look at efficacy. And then the phase 3 study, which is the biggest study, normally has thousands of people in, and they look at kind of long efficacy and the way in which the vaccine or the drug or whatever works. It's important to note all 3 of these stages also continue to look at safety. So sometimes during these stages, things will change. For example, dosing will change, the way in which vaccines or drugs are given will change. Various things will change throughout the trial as we get more data and as we adapt to the information we get from patients. So one of the things that happened during the vaccine process was that some of the trials were run kind of parallel to each other or alongside each other. So we had kind of phase 1, phase 2 studies, and we had phase 2, phase 3 studies. So these all kind of overlapped each other, but still had all of the ongoing regulatory processes and checks in place that you would expect of any other trial. So there was definitely nothing that was skipped over in that from that point of view. The other thing to say is during the trials, what would have happened is in terms of recruitment, often with a vaccine or with something where you're trying to prevent something, you need there to be enough of that infection around in order for you to actually see the effect of the trials. And so in some ways, the fact that the cases of COVID were so high throughout the year in different places meant that they had enough people who were exposed to the infection in order to show efficacy within the trials. And that's important to note because it might not be something that normally would happen. If it was something, for example, that didn't happen very often, or people didn't come into contact with very often, then this wouldn't really happen. So that's
Dr.
one of the...
So just to pause you there, Dr. Sarah. So
yeah, sure.
Then I suppose the question would also be then how many specifically, how large was the black sample from that first batch that you got the data from there to say it works on?
Yeah.
black?
So one of the things I want to say initially is that when we talk about the fact that Black, Asian, or other ethnic minority peoples are more at risk of COVID, the majority of us believe, and from the data it suggests it's not due to genetic or biological differences. I think that's really important to state because often when people ask me that question, it's because they're like, well, obviously there must be something about us that makes us more at risk, and therefore we need to check that this vaccine works in our people. The reality of it is when we've broken down the data and we've looked at the data, a lot of the data would suggest that actually some of the things that put us more at risk are to do with societal things, including things like
economics, yeah.
But also structural racism. Let's call it out when we see it and when we know it has an effect on our outcomes. For years, we've known that health outcomes are affected by the states in which people live, but also the daily lived experience of people generally affects the way in which their health is. And COVID has shone a light on that, and it's really important to know that. The second thing to say about the trials itself is all the trials had a relatively good amount of people from Black and Asian or ethnic minority backgrounds, probably about 10%, depending on which trial you look at. And you may say 10% may not seem like a very big amount, but when you think actually in the UK, we're only 3% of the population, 10% is actually quite a big percentage of people within a big trial to be involved. And it's important to note that there was definitely no difference in regards to efficacy when you break down as per ethnicity. So that's one of the things I wanted to highlight.
So we're clear on that then. So it's not, so the trials, whether it happened on Black, white or other, the vaccine helps either.
Exactly.
Yeah? So
exactly
it's
that.
specifically about Black people, why the vaccine should be adjusted, for want of a better word. No? Okay, fine. Because that's been a lot of the that's been going around in the WhatsApp groups about why is this vaccine for us. So that was very clear. Thank you for that. I think, as I said, we're gonna keep on taking questions. I've got some questions that they're putting into the group. We did want to do a poll, and the poll we just wanted to know at the beginning of this, and we're going to take another poll at the end. If you could just say whether or not you are considering to take the vaccine at this point or not. And then we're going to have another poll at the end of it. And we'll see if anybody's changed their mind since then. So just put in yes or no, and that's fine. Dr. Krista, what is actually in this vaccine anyway?
Well, I mean, I think Sarah's probably covered that already in terms of the different types of vaccines and how they're made. So the Pfizer vaccine, as she spoke about, contains is what's called an mRNA. So mRNA is a little sequence of nucleotides, or what they're called, and your body uses that to turn those into protein, and that produces this spike protein that you talked about around the outside of the virus. So that's the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, which is coming, they say late spring, so probably end of April, May. It's made in that same way, and it's encased in a bit of lipid, so that's just a fancy word for fat. And that's how it gets into your cells when you put it into the injection intramuscularly. And then the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, as Sarah's already pointed out, contains an adenovirus, which is a type of virus that contains a bit of a genetic sequence to produce the spike protein. So it tells your cells to produce the spike protein, and then all of these then allow you to produce an antibody response and also a T cell, so another bit of your immune response. So that's saved up for the next time should you encounter the virus.
Is there anything that's used in this vaccine that hasn't been used before? Are we creating something new to put in this vaccine, or are we using bits of the vaccine that have already been out there and we're just creating a different vaccine?
So I think what you're getting at is the technology new. So with regards to the mRNA approach to vaccines, that element is a new technology and a new approach to vaccination, yes. Whereas previously we've either used, the live virus itself, so very few of those are like that, or you have what we call attenuated virus, so the virus is kind of altered in some way so that it can't replicate itself when it's given. So this is a new vaccine technology. Yes, that's fair to say.
And how stable is it, or is this what we're learning now?
Well, it depends what you mean by stable. I mean, we know that it works, and I think it's important to point out that yes, you had the clinical trials, which were very, very important and key in demonstrating that these things do work, and they're also very safe at the beginning of the vaccine rollout. But we've had 29 million people in the UK who've already had their vaccines. You've had, I think it's about 79 million in the US. Tens of millions in Europe again. So we've had huge numbers of people who have now had the vaccines now, and we know that overall they're very, very, very safe. Public Health England has also published, I think on the 23rd of March is the date, and maybe Hamish, I don't know, will probably give us a bit of information about that, but they have been collating data in real world, what's happening here in the UK, and they have published on the effectiveness of the vaccine in the over 80s population to date, because obviously they were the first ones to get done. So we've got a big group of those that they can look at, and they've been proved to be very effective, effectiveness of 80% in that real world population. So we're constantly gathering information. We know that they're safe and we know that they're effective to date, because, well, nobody can see into the, future. But today, there's no reason for us to believe that there are going to be problems down the road, because historically that has not happened with any other vaccines.
Okay, Dr. Hamish, I know you want to come in on this as well.
Yeah, just a couple of points. So the first thing is the mRNA vaccines. They are new, but they're not unknown. So mRNA vaccines have been studied before for influenza virus, for rabies, and for a virus that's afflicted many of our family and friends back in the Caribbean and the tropics. So Zika virus as well. So it is a novel technology, certainly, but it's not the first time this type of technology was considered for usage to deploy a vaccine. The other is Dr. Krista was alluded to, and she just touched on. So Public Health England was starting to publish what's known as real-world data, and just as she said, it's showing that, I guess, the distinction between real-world data and clinical trials data. Clinical trials are the ideal environment to test a vaccine or a treatment. You randomly assign people to different groups, one of which might be a placebo or a saline injection, so something that's harmless and has no effect, and monitor them over time to see who develops a particular outcome, which could be illness, hospitalization, or death. The phase 3 clinical trials, Dr. Sarah was alluding to, have shown just how safe and effective the 3 currently approved vaccines are. And what we're seeing now is real-world data after the administration of millions of vaccination doses in the UK that show a dramatic reduction in severe illness, hospitalization, and death. So by that, I mean an 80% drop in hospitalizations for the Pfizer vaccine. And that's based on millions of dosages administered since the 8th of December. The other thing that's come through based on real-world data in people working in healthcare settings, and unfortunately, as other panelists will know, working in a healthcare setting does put you at increased risk of encountering COVID, the virus that causes COVID-19. What we're seeing is amongst this group is that the vaccines, both the Oxford AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccine, reduce the actual risk of being infected with the virus that causes COVID-19 by 72% after the first dose, and that goes up to more than 80% after the second dose. So what we're seeing is exciting, because we're seeing clear evidence that outside of the clinical trial setting, in the real world, on people in our community, that there's a clear drop in hospitalization, severe disease, and death, and a drop in infections as well. So we're starting to see evidence that the vaccines also give us that added benefit and that added reassurance of not actually being infected with the virus. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted to come in on those 2 points.
Thank you very much. Before I go anywhere else, Reggie, have you got any questions from the chat room there that you'd like to?
Yes, we do have some questions, and there's quite a few of them. Many, many questions. All right. I'm not sure which particular doctor this will appeal to, but there is a question here. Will the vaccine be required to be given yearly like the flu virus?
So I could start on that, and others would weigh in. So the answer is we don't know yet, but given the fact that there are a number of variants emerging in different parts of the world, the variants that have emerged in parts of the UK that may be more transmissible or may slightly escape the vaccines, let's say, they may impact upon that real world effectiveness. It does seem likely, in my view, that there will be a need for an annual booster to have a COVID-19 vaccination each year. So that's my take on it. I'd welcome thoughts from other panelists.
I'd agree.
Okay. Another question from a colleague had a vaccine last week. After giving the vaccine, the needle was withdrawn and part of the vaccine squirted out the arm to the floor. What is the policy around quantifying a repeat dosage? I think that's very technical, that one.
Yeah. So I would say I think that's quite a tricky question because it's very specific to a certain person, a certain incident. I mean, one of the reasons why vaccines are given with boosters is because sometimes initially people might not mount a very good response to the first dose, and that's one of the reasons why boosters are given. I would think even if not all of the vaccine went in, there still would be some response. I mean, the important thing to state, and it's something that I'm sure you've heard everybody say already anyway, is even when you are vaccinated, at the moment, people still need to continue with all of the measures that were ongoing. So I personally have had both my Pfizer vaccines. I'm 2 weeks post-vaccination, I think now, in fact, more than 2 weeks post both my vaccinations, but I'm still using the same precautions that I would have done beforehand. So wearing a mask, washing my hands, keeping a safe distance, and it's important that we continue to do that. One of the reasons is because obviously there are a lot of people who are not yet vaccinated, but also because there will be a variability in regards to the way in which people mount a response. And we know specifically after vaccination that it takes a couple of weeks before there is any protection at all. And that's another thing to say, because often I see people talk about the fact that they say, oh, so-and-so was vaccinated and they then ended up in hospitals with COVID a week or two later. And it's important to note that you don't really get any particular immune response until about 2 weeks after your first dose. And you still definitely need the booster in order to ensure that your antibodies are at a good level.
Thank you. And that kind of like really answers the next question, which was about to come in, sort of. Why do we still need to wear a mask once you have taken the vaccine, from Elaine Shaw?
Who would like to come in on that? Or is that
think
not?
Well, I think Sarah's pretty much covered that. So as you said, it's a related topic, but you know, effectively, you still need to wear a mask because the data is still coming in about how transmissible the COVID still is, if you're still able to catch it, how many people have asymptomatic infection. So it's very important, particularly at this phase of the pandemic when, you know, there's still large numbers of unvaccinated people as well, and the data is still coming in about, you know, reduced transmission. So even though there is generally good news so far in that regard, it's not 100% concrete, and it is also not 100%. So, you know, as Hamish pointed out, you know, the reduction in transmission of the Pfizer, we think is probably sort of about 70-75%, and the AstraZeneca data is also looking to be fairly similar. So that is the good way off 100%. And whilst we still have large numbers of people in the community who are susceptible, we have to protect them.
So interesting, because I had the vaccine today, almost 10 hours and counting. I feel fine. I don't feel tired, although a little bit tired. And I asked the person who was injecting it into my arm, I did actually ask him, I said, what is the efficacy difference between the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer? And he actually replied saying that we don't know yet. And he didn't have any data or statistics. Is that something that is being fed to everybody who is supplying the vaccine at ground level?
Go on, Hamish.
sorry, Krista, I'm going to cut across here. Just to say that there are training materials for vaccinators on gov.uk. I don't know the answer to that specific question, but that person's absolutely right. each of those trials would have looked at the particular vaccine candidate against most likely a placebo, and they didn't compare one vaccine against the other. So you'd have to do an entirely different type of trial to compare, let's say, the Pfizer vaccine to the Oxford AstraZeneca. So it's almost, while it's tempting to say, well, one vaccine offers 94% efficacy and another is 89% efficacy, the comparison between those two figures is nonsensical because they were not compared against each other. So what is happening now is that there are trials underway to look at starting your course of vaccination with one particular vaccine and then having the follow-up dosage be another vaccine. So that is not standard practice currently in the vaccination program. We need to build up the evidence base to see if that works. The theory is that, and I see Dr. Sarah is shaking her head as well, so she would have some insight on this. But it's just something to really make sure that the vaccine supply is robust and we have options going forward, especially in the increasing likelihood.
I did ask also in regards to the variants as well and the efficacy on the variants of the vaccine. And once again, he came back with the answer that he didn't know. So it kind of like, backs up exactly what you just said, Dr. Hamish.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think again,
can I just make one quick point though?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you just have to keep in mind that obviously, we're vaccinating hundreds of thousands of people per day, and that requires a huge army of volunteers, not all of whom are doctors. They've been lay people who've been trained to be vaccinators. So I think it's important to get across that you're not necessarily going to expect to have that level of consultation, I think, with each person you may come across who's vaccinating you, because it's quite a spectrum of people out there in terms of their involvement and in terms of their, relative expertise on these things. I think I just thought that was an important point to make.
And and sorry, with that in mind, I just wanted to give a big shout out to all the people who actually have volunteered to vaccinate, because I think it's a massive job and we wouldn't be able to do it without all the volunteers. I think it's also another important thing to say that actually the people who are volunteering and the people who are vaccinating are everyday members of a community. So there are GPs, our nurses, our paramedics, St. John's ambulance volunteers. There are multiple different people. So I think it's something to kind of also let kind of people out there who are worried that there may be some kind of conspiracy around kind of the vaccine and also the specific vaccine that Black people might get, in that it's just everyday people given the vaccine. This isn't some kind of weird organized network of people. These are literally people like you and I, your aunties, your uncles, your friends, who are giving out the vaccine. It's a massive community effort, and we're so grateful for all the help and effort that's been put into it by the members of the community who have been involved. It really has been amazing.
Thank you. I know Dr. Atta had something to say on that. Do you want to come in there, Dr.?
Yeah, no, just one point, obviously, to say that there is a lot we don't know yet, but what we do know, and I think the evidence is quite clear from the trials, that it does work in reducing the risk of severe illness. So we're thinking about, the endpoint we don't want, which is death. That's the thing. You don't want to go into hospital. Once you're in hospital and you go down that pathway, then that's when death occurs. And I think virtually every single vaccine, with 100%, and my panelists will correct me, but I think they're so effective at preventing death, serious illness. So you talk about the variants, and that's a big concern. So for example, the South African variant. So fair enough, there was that thing that said that it reduces the risk of, it doesn't really help with mild to moderate COVID. But then actually, if you look at severe COVID, stuff that you're going to die from, it works at that level. So I think, the evidence, if you look at it, they do work. They do work even for those variants at what you're most interested in, which is preventing death.
Okay, thank you very much. I think one of the questions that I want to ask as well, and I think this is for our communications expert, why has the message not actually reached the people it's supposed to, and why hasn't it had the impact that it should have had, Nadine?
I think we need to unpick your question a bit. So you had asked, why hadn't it reached the people it was meant to? Well, my response to that would be, if it was meant to reach us, it would have reached us. So I think that the expectation that the government was actively trying to engage us is incorrect, because, so, in Pacha would say action, not a bag of chat. If you're Trinidadian, you say action over chat. The government has not done, in my opinion, and my opinion's not humble, what it's supposed to, which is look after all of its people. And if you look at the stats, we die at 2 or more times the rate of white people in this country. And our outcomes for Dr. Sarah given us that earlier, where she said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Sarah, that a black guy in his late 40s with the same kind of health conditions probably has the same prognosis as a 65-year-old white man. If there was that discrepancy, or if that discrepancy truly exists, why are black people, African and Caribbean people, not being given access to the vaccines earlier? If our morbidity or our rates of survival are so much less than white English people, why are we not treated as part of like an emergency public health? Our situation be treated as like a real public health crisis within the existing pandemic and crisis. And so I just don't think that the government cares enough, or cares enough about us. And so I don't think that we need to dwell on that, because it's not effective at this time. What we need to do is try and survive this. So yes, the vaccine is one way in which we build herd immunity. It's one way in which we look after our loved ones and our broader communities, but it's also a way in which we come together and help each other and protect each other, which is something which is, I think, is an advantage of the pandemic, because it's highlighted a lot of the institutional issues and the systemic racism, but it's also given us an opportunity to find our own strategies to become more independent and organize on a community level, so that we can become the best advocates for ourselves. Because if we're not organized, if we don't create platforms like Set the Trend, where we can share information and find out how to support each other, they are never going to listen to us. We have to create our platforms, we have to synthesize our messages, and we have to advocate for ourselves. So in a nutshell, Ray, that's the answer to your question. The government don't care enough, and the other side of it is we're not organized enough, we haven't developed the platforms enough, and we need to advocate more for our issues. We can't just sit down and expect people to come and save us when we're not even saving ourselves.
Thank you so much, Dimdini. And I have to back up, because you're extremely passionate about this, as is everybody who is here on the panel. About making sure and ensuring that us as a black community are better educated and empowered. So we got to give our hats off to you for coming up with this amazing program, which you're putting together to try and help us as black people to do what we need to do to survive. As you say, there is a question in regards to the disparity. I mean, while you're talking about disparity, the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre report on the 7th of April forecasted that more black people were going to die. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the reports. Was this forecast accurate? And what does the data tell us in terms of projections for the future? If there's any doctors who can answer that.
Well, I think the projections to the future bit, I think probably I will leave to Hamish. But in terms of, so that's the ICNARC data, so that's the ICU, the National ICU Audit, and they publish data every week. So actually it's a very good, if you just Google ICNARC, it'll come up with the summary of the data for all of the intensive care beds, their occupancy, what's happening with the COVID patients, the mortality, who's died, who's been discharged, and it's got all of that information. And it breaks everything down according to, it does comorbidities, BMI, ethnicity, so it's got all of those various elements to it. The data about Black people being more affected certainly was a big factor at the start of the pandemic, and then we sort of dropped down to our proportion of the population as the year has gone by in terms of our occupancy of ICU beds. For Asian people, it has remained slightly higher than what you'd expect for the percentage of the population that they do actually take up. So I'm not sure if I fully answered that question, but in terms of sort of projections and what we predict will happen in the future, I mean, there is a very good document, again, that's been published in the last week, looking forward to the next, few months and what proportion of the population you expect to get COVID, who's going to get COVID, who'd get COVID despite having been vaccinated. And those numbers are fairly high. It's, about 20-something% will get COVID. Another 20% of people who have been vaccinated will still also get COVID. And so if Black people as a population haven't been vaccinated, then it stands to reason that we can perfectly well expect to be a much larger proportion of that group of people who have got COVID going forward. But I think probably Hamish probably will want to comment from a sort of a mathematical point of view, how you model that and how you predict that going forward.
So if I could just briefly comment, I think that Dr. Krista hit the nail on the head. So we're in a situation where we are about to shift the paradigm and regain some semblance of normalcy and some control over COVID-19. And the best way of doing that is through the vaccine. However, the initial data emerging clearly shows that when you divide by ethnic group, the ethnic group that's least likely to have been vaccinated to date would be people of Black, Caribbean, African, other Black ethnicity. And it's quite sobering, to be honest, because if you look at that, deaths are more likely to occur in people above the age of 80. It's also higher once you're above the age of 60. If you look at all the age groups all the way down and you break it down by ethnic group, the national coverage rate is mostly matched by people of white ethnicity, and the lowest across all age bands with people of Black ethnicity. So we are in a situation where, yes, and I've seen the messages coming across the bottom, it's absolutely true that people of Black, Caribbean, and African ethnicity are more likely to be infected with the virus that causes COVID-19 and to die from it. If we're in a situation where we are least likely to accept the vaccine, that factor will only increase over time.
Okay, Dr. Hamish, thank you for that. Just a quick, I'm going to go to some more questions to Reggie in a minute from the audience, but just I want a quick answer. Have all the doctors on here, have you all received the COVID jab?
Of course.
So only Dr. Hamish hasn't as yet. So that answers someone's question in the chat room. Right, Reggie, can you give us?
Is there a reason why Dr. Hamish hasn't taken?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So I am eagerly anticipating my turn to get the vaccine. The reason I haven't been vaccinated is because I am not in one of the 9 priority groups for phase 1 of the vaccination program. So I need to wait until it goes out to people between the age of, well, I'm giving away my age here, between the age of 40 and 50 from the middle of April. Yeah. So I need to wait until the middle of April before. And I'm always checking to see if the Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunizations, if they're assessing things and reevaluating things. But that's the only reason that I haven't been vaccinated yet. It's because I'm not in a frontline clinical role or any of the priority groups of vaccination to date.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Hamish.
Can I ask a question? Can you get
hold on, East? Can you hold? I just want to take some more from the people who are in the audience, because if we don't, they will slaughter us and say they haven't had a chance to do that. Reggie, can you come up with some questions, please, from the audience, please?
Here's a really interesting one. It isn't specifically to do with the vaccine, but it's from Bayesian Lime. It says, I know of persons who have had the vaccine and developed a blood clot. So why state there is no evidence it causes clots? As for the testing, ethylene, I hope I pronounced that right, ethylene oxide is on the stick and is associated with carcinoma, cancer. How dangerous is the testing stick with those sticks up your throat and up your nose? So there's 2 parts there. One about blood clot and the second about the testing stick.
Ethylene oxide, yes.
Yeah.
Who's that to? Which doctor would
That's
like
obviously somebody who's a professional.
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
It's fine. I was going to let you go, but so there are a couple of things I want to say about this. So it's important that people note that when a vaccine is approved, or when anything is approved drug-wise, there is an ongoing surveillance and ongoing evaluation of side effects, possible side effects, severe and serious side effects. Many of you guys will have heard of a system called Yellow Card, or may not have heard of it, but it's actually something that within this country, anybody can report to. And it's important that if you have had a vaccine and you think you have a side effect related to the vaccine, that you report it. But it's also important to note that when we look at these adverse reactions, there's a process that goes on which evaluates whether or not this is actually, whether or not there's a causative link. So the first thing I always say is correlation does not equal causation. And that means that something can happen around the time of something happening and not be linked to it specific, as in not be a cause of it. The other thing to say is that when you look at things, sometimes there are confounders. And what we mean by confounders is there are other things that perhaps may increase somebody else's risk of something. So a good example in regards to blood clots is we know actually that the incidence of blood clots in general is relatively high. So it's not unusual for people to have blood clots, and that actually there are other things that people may take, such as the oral contraceptive pill, etc., that can also lead to blood clots. So specifically in kind of young women or various other people, there's that risk. So when the information in regards to this possible increased risk of blood clots was highlighted by a number of countries within Europe, the first thing to say is it was something that was seen in the trial data. So the trial data didn't show that. And then what happened was a process, a very complex, I'm going to lie, it's not a straightforward process, a complex process which involves kind of infectious disease doctors, virologists. It involves as people who are specialists in thrombosis, people who are specialists in drug manufacture, etc., where they look at the incidence of these occurrences. And one of the first things they do is they look to see whether or not it's above the normal incidence that you would expect. And then they also look at, is there a possible causative link, i.e., is there a way in which the vaccine works that could lead to this? And are we seeing it at a rate that would suggest that this is definitely a thing? So that's why there was this outcome that showed that actually they didn't believe, at least from the data that they have so far. And the data is ongoing. And when I talked earlier on about the trial phases, each trial phase looks for kind of common, less common, rare, and very rare side effects. But there is a possibility that there are also even rarer side effects. And what I mean by that is like 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million of something being caused by a vaccine or a drug. And so there is still the possibility that there is a very rare incidence. But if we look at the number of cases that were reported or have been reported to date in regards to blood clots, in comparison to the number of doses of vaccine, I think it's something like 20 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine have been given. Hundreds of millions of doses of other vaccines have been given across the world. And the incidence of clots in that group of people is actually less than you would expect normally within the community. So actually, that's kind of one of the reasons why it was decided that actually there wasn't a link. But there is ongoing surveillance. And one of the things I am reassured about when it comes to science is that we are happy to look at data and reevaluate things. And if we think that there is a safety signal in regards to it, it will be something that people will look out for more and will be more aware of, and etc. Sorry. I think I rambled a bit. Hamish might have been able to say that a bit more succinctly than I have. Sometimes I go off on tangents. But I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, it does. It does. Thank you, Dr. Sarah.
I couldn't have said it better. I'm spot on. I completely agree.
Right. So, Reggie, have we got another question from the audience, please?
Can I just quickly rebuff something from Dr. Sarah and Philin? Please don't take it personally. It's not from me. It's from one of our audience who says, in regards to your answer regarding the clot question, it is clear it's related to the vaccine, but clinically, as a disclaimer, you would say that very disappointed, and this is why, as black people, we should not trust anybody. Can you just dispel that myth?
Can I comment on that? Can I comment on that? Can I
Please
comment
do.
on
I
that?
thought I'd give you an opportunity because this is obviously this is what it's about. We're here for this reason.
I'm glad they brought that up because I think it's important to make a point here. So as Sarah's already pointed out, in order to be able to know that the clots are caused by the vaccine, in real world where you don't have a group who haven't had it that you're comparing directly to a group who have had it, okay, you would expect to see that if the incidence is higher. What is key, and in particular as my role as a neurologist, is this issue of the clots in the head, so the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. And that is something that is being looked at very closely. That is distinct from the clots in the legs or the odd clots in the lung, etc. But the clots in the head are particularly concerning, obviously, because it can have significant effects in terms of disability and possibly death. And some of those cases have been associated also with a reduction in a blood clotting element called platelets, and it is quite probable that those are actually linked to the vaccine. That is one small subset of the clots that have happened, and it is possible that those are linked to the vaccine. Some cases have been in people who would be predisposed to that anyway, so they have an underlying, clotting problem or a genetic cause or whatever it is. But it is still very important to understand that that is being monitored very closely. We're on the lookout. Everyone has been alerted, so we are looking out for it. So if it's out there and it's happening, we will find more. Okay, and then the other point to make is that if you think about the neurological consequences of these kinds of clots, if you look at the neurological impact of COVID itself, your chance of having a stroke with COVID is probably in the vicinity of about 1%. The number of people of a young stroke, and by young I mean under 50, people who've had strokes are probably 6 to 7 times higher than we've typically seen. So again, it's always a matter of weighing risks and benefits and how likely is something to occur. And if something only happens at a chance of 1 in 2 million or 1 in 5 million, you're not going to find that out until you vaccinate millions and millions of people.
Thank you so much. And to the person who asked that, I hope you got yourself a satisfactory answer. Whilst we're on the subject of kind of like busting these myths, Ray, was what I don't know. I'm not sure what section we're on now, actually. Let me leave it to Ray. He's the chair.
Can I have another question, please, Reg?
Another question.
Well, I want to try and get us through as much as questions from the audience as possible, because otherwise they'll say we question.
Well, it's a base.
Do you mind?
A lot of them are regarding the clot as well, and we've just had that answered just now recently. People were also asking about the herbalism and traditional medicine as well, which came up, and in regards to the benefits of herbalism. It's so interesting because one of my good friends, who I consider as a very intelligent person, said that he didn't feel that he needed to take the vaccine because he's 45, 46 and very healthy, and felt that he didn't need to take it. So because he is quite a person who has a lot of natural remedies, green tea and ginger and all this type of stuff. So it would be great to get some questions from people in regards to the herbalism, because at the moment, we've pretty much answered quite a lot of the questions that have come through already.
Hamish, I want to ask you a question around the data side of things. Tigis asks, how certain are we around the number of COVID-19 deaths? How accurate are we? Because there's a lot of people saying that everybody's been put down. Everybody that dies at the moment is being put down. They are COVID related. So how accurate do we think that those numbers are? For the people that have died, it's one too many, but how accurate do you think that they are? And
go ahead, sorry.
And also people say that hospitals are getting paid bonuses for putting down COVID related deaths. So if that's a question that you could also answer as well as.
So I'll start with the first. I'll start in responding to Tigger's question about the accuracy of the COVID-19 deaths. And I would argue that the UK is in a position to have one of the most accurate sets of data to look at deaths after COVID-19. And the reason I say this is the World Health Organization recommends that you use COVID-19 on the death certificates to be the gold standard, the official source of data for reporting of deaths. However, in the UK, despite the fact that the system works really well to register deaths, there's an inevitable delay between the time of death and the reporting of death. So for the purposes of monitoring a pandemic and to report daily death counts, there is no internationally approved definition. So what is happening at Public Health England is that we use a number of different data sources to really comprehensively look at deaths. And by that, I mean, we look at data from 4 different sources. So the first is the hospitals themselves, the NHS trusts will report deaths every day. The second is that local health protection teams will also be aware of deaths that occur associated with outbreaks in different settings. The third is that NHS records of individuals who unfortunately died are updated. So there's a linkage process that takes place between a positive COVID-19 test with someone who's died as reported on the NHS record. And the fourth, which is the one with the longest time delay, is the death certification reported by the Office for National Statistics. So in using those 4 sources of data, Public Health England is in a position to accurately report the number of deaths that occur in every 24-hour period. So when you see that death count that's reported, it's data as of 5 o'clock that morning. So it's that timely, and very few countries are in a position to report as comprehensive a source of data and on as timely a basis. So there are the other thing that gives some assurances is that the reported figures you see in the press that look at deaths within 28 days of a COVID-19 test, those trends match up with the death data reported through death certificates. And also there's another methodology called excess mortality, where you look at the number of deaths over a particular period compared to the historical average over the past 5 years. So again, looking at all these metrics, we could look at the trends in COVID-19 deaths, but for the purposes of daily reporting, we use 4 sources of data to really robustly and comprehensively monitor how frequently deaths are occurring.
Cool. And
there was another question about the incentive, and I saw Dr. Sarah was kind of, I don't know if she wants to comment on that one about the alleged incentivization of reporting COVID.
I think that.
Sorry, Dr. Sarah, you're going to mute again.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that kind of information is related to healthcare in the States as opposed to in the UK. In the UK, there is no incentive for pushing down that somebody has died of COVID, as far as I'm aware. The other thing to say is actually, I personally think that there probably isn't an under-reporting in regards to the number of deaths related to COVID. And the reason I say this is because specifically during the first wave, and I think this probably has changed a lot as our understanding of the infection itself has changed, there were a lot of people who would have been swabbed for the virus who may have come into hospital maybe a couple of weeks after their symptoms, etc., who would have had a negative swab result. So the way in which we test for COVID is very complicated, and you may see a lot of people arguing online about false positives, false negatives, and the way in which tests are validated. But one of the things we definitely noticed within the first wave was that there were people who came into hospital who had very obvious COVID symptoms, had very characteristic chest x-rays. And what I mean by that is when we take an x-ray of somebody as they come into hospital, often what you'll find is they have changes or what we call infiltrates on their chest x-ray on both sides. So it's very characteristic of COVID in that it causes this kind of bilateral changes in your chest. And that's something we see quite commonly with COVID. There are other things we see quite commonly with COVID in regards to the way in which people's bloods look. So their inflammatory markers are often quite high. Some of the other markers of kind of clotting, etc., are also high. So there are a number of things that now, as a clinician who's seen, I'd probably say hundreds of patients with COVID, we're very used to kind of identifying and saying this is COVID. However, very much so within the first wave, we noticed that there were a small percentage of people, maybe 5-10%, where they had this clinical picture, but when you swabbed them, their swab was negative. If you repeated the swab was still negative. And I think what we have learnt now as the year's gone on is actually there is a point where some people, despite having infection and problems related to COVID, so the complications of COVID pneumonitis, as we call it, in terms of the pneumonia that people get, their swab results still might be negative, and that's important. And actually, the reason I know a little bit about this is because my team have published a paper on it, which is available if you Google it, and it looks at kind of the number of people that present like that and why they present like that and their kind of clinical picture and what happens to them. I think this was also later validated by the fact that in the second wave, where we were swabbing people in the community, we were getting people who had positive community swabs, but by the time they came to hospital, their swabs were negative. And so that also further validated what we'd already known and seen within the first wave. So I think people are always very skeptical and a bit weary of the data that is related to COVID. And I understand that, but the reality is it is an infection that is killing a great number of people. It has affected a number of people. And unfortunately, there are certain people who are at higher risk of this infection and have been disproportionately affected. So I think that's something I just wanted to highlight in regards to COVID reporting.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Sarah. There's one question I don't know who to put this one at, but I've seen it in the chat room. There's a couple of them. One is we're talking maybe a lot around the more mature age range here, but when we're talking about young people in their teens, in their 20s, in their early 30s, they won't die as much from COVID. Why should they get vaccinated? And two, would you advocate for a young woman, in fact, a young man, because I suppose the fertility starts from men. If they were trying to have a child, would you advocate for them to take the vaccine as well? Because I've seen that question as well in the chat room.
So I'm happy to start off, and I'm sure others will have thoughts as well. So the reason why, even if you're young and healthy, vaccination is highly recommended is because it's the best means to protect yourself from being infected with COVID and to prevent you from inadvertently passing it on to members of your community or your family. The other is the fact that even in young, healthy people, there is a syndrome known as long COVID that could impact at least 10% of people that have had infection with COVID-19 in the past. And these symptoms, they resemble chronic fatigue syndrome and they last for months on end. People complain about breathlessness that persists for a really long time, being unable to do the types of activities or exercises you can normally do. So I would say those are the two key reasons. And then I'll see if other panelists want to come in on this one before going on to the second question.
I'd just like to jump in just for a second and just say that we are in the middle of a global health pandemic. Even if we accept to some degree that it might not be 100% accuracy with regard to the numbers, we are in a situation where we are trying our best to survive. And so we have to look at the data. We have to consistently assess the data to think about how we're going to make the best of it. It's just like cooking. The first time you cook rice and peas or ground stew chicken or oil down or run down, whatever it is, the first time you're in the kitchen without your mum or your grandma by yourself and you're trying to cook this food, you're going to taste it and say, okay, maybe it needed more salt. Maybe I needed to put sugar in the oil to brown the chicken, whatever you're doing. And that's your data. You review your recipe, you review your data until it gets right. And I think that I understand the fear around the vaccine. I understand the fear generally, because I trust him. Like, I completely get that because I sit in that camp too. But there also needs to be some kind of allowances made for the fact that we are trying to survive a pandemic and we have to review the data as it comes. And so right now we have to hill and gully ride. This is what we're doing. So coming here, sharing our information, asking and answering your questions, we're just going to tough it out and see what happens in the long run. So if you choose to take the vaccine, then fine. If you don't choose to take the vaccine, then it's also fine. It's your choice. But the expectation, I think, that we're meant to have all of the answers, and those answers can't change and they have to be set is not realistic.
Thanks a lot, Nadine. Before I go to EastEnder, just want to, if someone can just finish off that question. If you're young, would any of the doctors advise, if you're going to be trying to have a child, would you advise on taking at that age, at 20s or early 30s, would you advise them to take the vaccine? Oh, you're on mute again, Dr. Sarah. Sorry.
Oh, I keep on thinking that I've... Oh my God, the phrase of 2020 and 2021. Right, sorry. So one of the things I just wanted to quickly talk about, and I think it's something that comes up whenever I have this conversation with the community, and I've had numerous conversations with the community about this, and I do it because actually I care. I'm not paid to do this. It doesn't make a difference to me salary-wise, etc. Whether or not I do this, I'm doing this in my spare time. So that's a disclaimer for me. But I think a lot of these questions and a lot of the worries and fears around vaccination come back to trust. And understandably, as a community, we have justified trust problems when it comes to healthcare, pharmaceuticals, the government. We have time and time and again been, unfortunately, or disproportionately affected by things because of structural racism, because of lack of caring, because of people even really thinking about us as a people and caring about us and our own outcomes. And so, like Nadine says, we do need to look out for each other. And this is exactly what this conversation is about. It's not about us trying to pressure you into having the vaccine. It's about us trying to look out for people who look like us, who we've seen disproportionately affected by this. And it's not something we're making up. It's facts. I know we live in a world where, there are things where people talk about like fake news or deep fake and all these things that like they think are not real. This is fact. I've seen it with my own eyes. Many of us have seen it with our own eyes. It's not something that's made up. So that's the first thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say about the vaccine specifically is, like has been pointed out already this evening, there will be another wave of infection, unfortunately. We're very sure it's coming. And the people who will be disproportionately affected will be the same people who've been disproportionately affected previously. But if as a community we're not vaccinating, then it actually will amplify that disproportionate effect as well, because we will be the people who will still be at heightened risk. And that's just a reality. When we talk about us as a population and as a percentage of the population within this country, we are already 3% of the population within this country. I think Asian people are like 4 or 5%. So as a whole, like the majority ethnic minorities in this country only make up 9 to 10% of the population. So we're not a big percent. The people who are taking the vaccines in their droves are people of white descent. White British people are taking the vaccine in their droves because they're lucky that they don't come from a position where we do, where they already have to think about whether or not the government have their best interests in heart. So what I want you guys to do, if you can, is to put yourself in the position when you're thinking, actually, this isn't something that is specifically targeted at us. It's something that actually the majority of the white population have taken because they're lucky that they don't have that distrust and that they realize that this is something that's good for them, and say, okay, if they're all taking it and it's good for them, why is it not good for us? And I think that's the question I want us to have. Like, why do people think it's not good for us in that specific setting where it's actually something that within these other communities people are trusting and taking because they're lucky that they don't have the history that we do?
Okay, but Dr. Sarah, specifically, if I'm 20 odd and I'm 30.
Yeah, sorry. So I get distracted. You need to thank you for getting me back on the point. So in regards to younger people and specifically women of childbearing age, yes, take the vaccine, especially if you're thinking about getting pregnant. The reason is because we know, or we're starting to see from the data, that people who have antibodies to the vaccine can also pass them on to their child. That's newer data that's coming out when they have their child. But we also know that pregnant ladies have an increased risk of worse disease as well. So if it's something that you're thinking of doing in the future, you should protect yourself now while you can in order to reduce your risk of severe disease if you have it. And again, back to the thing about age, when we look at age and we compare it for Black people versus white people, actually we're getting severe disease and worsening outcomes at a younger age than you would do if you're a white person. So for kind of age, if you look at something like, so the example I always use, if you look at a Black male who is 40 or 45, if they have one or two comorbidities, and that might be anything from just having slightly high blood pressure, well-controlled diabetes, be a bit overweight, these people have the same mortality or morbidity risk as somebody who is 65 and white and has no comorbidities. So that's important to note. We are unfortunately at risk due to problems that are societal and based on multiple different things, including increased exposure. But there is a way for us to help ourselves, and there is a way for us to prevent this disease. And so we should do everything we can in order to do that.
Okay, thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
EastEnder?
We are just under 30 million people being vaccinated in the UK. And we've been in lockdown for a good period of time. How will there be a third wave? How will that happen?
So there are a couple of reasons for that. The first thing is that age-based strategy has been used to do the vaccination, because the first phase of vaccination was to prevent death. So that's why it started out with people 80 and older, people living in care homes, people with underlying health conditions. So we're in a situation where the vast majority, and as Dr. Sarah was alluding to, this is mostly driven by the white British demographic, but the vast majority of people above the age of 70 have had at least one dose of the vaccine. So there are a few things to bear in mind. One is you need a few weeks to mount a sufficient immune response to protect yourself. Secondly is there's a 12-week interval between the first and the second vaccine. And it's really after that second dose that you mount a sufficient immune response to give you the best possible protection. And thirdly, it's a phased rollout of the vaccine program. So as it currently stands, nobody under the age of 50 without an underlying health condition has been offered the vaccine by and large. So there's a massive chunk of the population that's still susceptible to COVID-19. And that is the basis for, it seems like there's going to be an easing in terms of the roadmap, easing of lockdown. It's on the 29th of March, and the rule of 6 will come into effect. But if we're not careful, we will see that third wave, a spike in people, I would argue, probably 60 and younger.
So the government's plan, its roadmap, will be irreversible then?
That I can't say if that's irreversible or not. When I read the roadmap, what they've done is they refer to those dates as indicative dates. So what you'll see going forward is they say no earlier than April 12th, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to cross that threshold, the government's published 4 tests. The first test is that the vaccination program, the deployment of that program is continuing as it should, is delivering and hitting its targets. And the second is that the cases and deaths are going in the right direction. I think what we'll see in a month's time is that deaths should fortunately keep dropping. As it currently stands, we're seeing, just back in January, there were over 1,000 deaths per day. It was horrible. Now we're in a situation where the most recent count was 58 deaths in the UK. So things have drastically improved because we've had that high vaccine coverage in older people. However, we're already seeing an uptick in cases, mostly driven by cases in young people, and that's even before this step on the roadmap that's taking effect on the 29th of March. So if we're not careful, there is going to be a third wave, and there could be a dialing back in terms of the easing of lockdown restrictions. So that's why it's important to maintain the practices that we're all sadly accustomed to it now, right? So maintaining space from outside, using that face covering, and washing your hands as well.
Thanks a lot for
and
that.
Is it worth adding as well that if you look at the country, again, as a plug for a vaccine, again, you're here to make up your own mind. But if you look to Israel, where actually their vaccine uptake is, the highest in the world, laboratories seeing the blunting of that third wave. So when you would expect, obviously we're all locked down, no one's doing anything. Once you start mixing up, you're going to get the virus spreading again. But actually in Israel, where they're more or less normalized usual things, I'm sure with the normal procedures, they're not seeing what you would expect in a normal third wave. And so we're on the way to that. But again, like people have said on the panel, it's happening in the communities where they're getting the vaccine. But, in our communities, if we don't get the vaccine, we are going to definitely experience the third wave. And so, yeah, I think that's why this discussion is really valuable, to encourage people to think really carefully and hopefully positively about the vaccine.
Thanks a lot, Dr.
I'd also add that the third wave actually comes with death. And so I think it's really important to pin down the phrases that we're using, because if we don't develop herd immunity in our community, then what that means is we will have zero protection apart from our general health and maybe the minerals we put in our body and so forth. But fundamentally, we will continue to die at a much higher rate. And then what will happen is our communities will be the vector for the coronavirus in this country. People won't want to come to certain areas because we haven't been vaccinated and or we haven't developed herd immunity, and we would just be like a cyclone community for coronavirus. And the impact that will have on us in terms of funding, in terms of socioeconomic, in terms of education, in terms of businesses, will be devastating. So this isn't a question just about taking the vaccines or not taking the vaccine. It's what will happen during the third wave. And if everybody else is vaccinated, everybody else gets herd immunity, but where we live in our communities, there's going to be a flight, because people that have means and access to leave aren't going to want to stay somewhere where the risk of severe illness and death is very high. And then that's going to affect schools and education. It's going to affect businesses. It's going to affect childcare. It's going to affect the amount of money our boroughs have, if so much of it is going to be diverted to try and keep people alive, because there's no herd immunity in our communities. So I think that even though I understand these decisions are personal, we are all members of families. We're all members of local and broader communities. And I think that when people are making these decisions, these are things that should also be taken into account.
Indeed. And we're definitely hitting that point home. Nadine, you mentioned about the remedies and natural remedies. I mean, it might be a time to move on to it because we're getting quite a few people asking about it. Afro Anderson says, no one ever speaks about the validity of nutrition over medicine. Why is a medicine pushed to people rather than pushing for better nutrition?
Can I just add on that as well? There's a question from Karen Scarlett, which is probably in the same vein. Why can't we not drive home the alternative medicine agenda? It is widely accepted vitamin D has a significant impact on boosting the immune system.
I would say that it's not true that we don't speak about natural remedies over medicine. We speak about these things all of the time. We use natural remedies through the food that we eat and how we maintain our bodies anyway, from the type of bush teas that we drink, or the way in which we use herbs, the way in which we eat ITAL more time. So I think that ITAL, or what I call ITAL liberty, is part of most of people that consider themselves to be healthy, is part of their everyday makeup, and that's cultural. But there are things within our environment, like coronavirus, that that our ITAL liberty cannot protect us from all the way. So obviously, the healthier you are, the greater chance you might have of not dying, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get seriously ill. So there's no data to support anywhere in the world that if you just take vitamin D or if you just eat ITAL, that you will be able to survive coronavirus. That there's nothing to support that. Of course, if you have other morbidities, like you might have sugar or you might have pressure, then, diabetes or high blood pressure, then your chances of survival are significantly reduced. But if you're a regularly healthy person, there's no data to support that alone is going to save you. I eat ITAL more time. I consider myself to be a very healthy person. But even I know, given my age range, that the chances of me surviving COVID unscathed is reduced, especially long COVID. vitamin D can't help me from long COVID. If I get long COVID, I don't even know if I'll be able to do my job anymore. So because of the debilitating
when you're
effects.
talking about, but when you're talking about long COVID, can we break down what long COVID is? Because there's COVID, and now we're also talking about long COVID. So can someone explain what actually long COVID is and how that is different from COVID?
I'll defer to the doctors.
Can I jump in here? Just because, and this is me just reflecting on the whole long COVID thing, because my other more esteemed colleagues will jump in, I'm sure. I think it's important to note that it's not a new thing. I think, for as long as we can remember, you have lots of people with the normal viruses we see around us. Lots of people, not many people, but there's some people, when they get sick from a virus, they clear the virus, but then the effects of the virus can last a long time. So, it can happen with common flu viruses. A lot of people, we hear about chronic fatigue. So I think Hamish alluded to the fact that a lot of this constellation of symptoms where you feel like you've got a cloud in your head, you get joint aches, you can't sleep well, you just feel just general sort of pains that don't quite go anywhere. You have chronic fatigue, you can't eat. Basically, it affects your mental, your whole psychosocial, how you feel, how you think, and how your body reacts. You're not the right person. And again, there are lots of factors leading into this, though. And I think we don't really, again, the body is so amazing and complex, so we don't fully know what leads to this process. This is something I see in my practice as a pediatric gastroenterologist. It happens in old people as well. So I think, it's now the old clinical name. We've given it a new name now called long COVID, but it's still the same thing, that it's not a pleasant thing to have. And at this point, I'll jump up to my colleagues, because I think, I'm sure Krista will see a lot of this in her work, and the others as well.
You're still muted, Dr. Krista. You're still muted, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I agree with that, and I think it's very interesting to hear that he sees a lot of that in a pediatric population. Obviously, fairly concerning as a parent as well. So long COVID is the name given to this symptom of fatigue, foggy brain, chronic headache, exertion on, feeling fatigued with very minimal exertion. And that has occurred post other viral infections. And we tend to see a lot of these patients in neurology. And I think it's important to note that this happens in all age groups post-COVID, very much so in young people who will obviously notice it more, because you'll notice if, you used to do a 10K and you can't do a 10K anymore if you did a 10K before. And it probably is the numbers are still not quite so clear yet, because we're analyzing the problem as it's happening, but it can be as high as probably 10% of people can get some of these kind of long COVID symptoms. So it is something that important that people should think about when they're considering vaccination versus getting COVID, which right now are the two options.
Thank you very much. Right, Reggie, have we got any more questions from?
Yes, we do have. Right, okay, going back to the remedies side of it, somebody has sent a message saying bleach. And, this was mentioned in regards to Donald Trump. Is bleach the cure or ultraviolet light?
Let's keep Donald Trump out of this one and stick to ultraviolet light.
Can anybody is ultraviolet light got anything to do with curing COVID?
If you go to the WHO website, which is a Mythbuster, the World Health Organization have a Mythbuster section on their website where they address this. I'm sure that Dr. Sarah Ann Filson is going to give us the answer. But that is on the World Health Organization's website, and the short answer is no. And to be quite honest, anybody that seriously is going to ingest bleach might.
Oh, she's gone.
She's gone. So the internet. Can I say? Yeah.
See, this is why you should have met Donald Trump.
I think if you're using, because I think early on I think he was always assumed that primarily was always via touch and services, or through surfaces you touch and then you spread it that way. And so it makes sense, if you're going to use bleach and surface cleaners, then that's okay. But to leap from that to say that if you drink it, then it doesn't make any sense at all. So, leave it for the surfaces, but not for ingesting and curing the body.
Thank you, Doctor. To someone, I see a question, and I'm going to take it because it's for the podcast, but it's also to do with COVID. Shinore says a range of experts should have come on to discuss natural health, naturopathy, and alternative medicines in conjunction with conventional medicine. I'd just like to say that a couple of weeks before we had part one, we had Basil Pempanzi on from, and everybody knows Pempanzi. There's about 5 or 6 natural remedy shops in London that he owns. He also has a vegan cookout as well, where you can go in there and just buy vegan food. Basil said it helps. He would not say it is the direct thing that helps you beat, that is the COVID. So forget the vaccine and take that. He wouldn't say that. And he didn't say that. He said, anything that you want to take, it helps. And I remember his words clearly that we as Black people are in a pandemic anyway before COVID come because of the way that we eat and the way that we are living. So I will go back to the YouTube and you will see that podcast with Basil Pempanzi on. It's on our YouTube page, Set the Trend Podcast, and then you can read all about you can hear all about what Basil Pempanzi said about that. Okay, so just like
can I just quickly come in there, if that's okay? So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of prevention versus cure versus general well-being and health. So one of the things I always like to say in these podcasts, in these conversations, is that it's important that we look at kind of people holistically and we think about their general health. So nobody's saying that you shouldn't take care of your general health. But what we are saying is that if there's something out there that can prevent or at least drastically reduce your risk of COVID, then it's a good thing. So things that we know work in public health, and some of the best public health initiatives in the world are, firstly, WASH, so clean water and sanitation. That has saved millions of billions of lives across the world. So when people say we don't talk about natural remedies, etc., or things that are good for you, we do, because WASH is very important, and that's one of the most natural things we can talk about, the fact that you need clean water and good sanitation. Secondly, vaccination. So within this country, we are very lucky to have one of the best vaccination programs in the world. Vaccines across the whole entire world have shown to save, I think there was a stat that we used earlier on that says something like 3 million lives a year, millions of lives over the period of time in which vaccinations have been available. They really do work. And those of you who have children will know that children have a number of vaccinations as children. And what that does is that has, in the Western world and in developed worlds, that has completely brought down the risk of infant mortality. So one of the reasons we don't see things like measles or whooping cough or diphtheria, etc., in this country is because of the fact that we have such a good vaccination program. There are areas of the world, unfortunately, that many of us may be connected to from a community point of view or may be originating from, where the rates of vaccination are not that high and they're still seeing these problems. So I think it's important to say that although this vaccine is a new vaccine, it's still part of that same kind of area of preventative medicine. Vaccination is about preventative medicine. It's not about treatment. It's about prevention. And so we need to do whatever we can within our own access, availability, etc., to help ourselves be as healthy as possible. That also includes things like, for example, if you have diabetes, ensuring you've got good control. If you have high blood pressure, ensuring that you have good control. But those things alone will not, unfortunately, protect you, because we've seen people in hospitals who have relatively mild diabetes, relatively mild hypertension, but still have ended up in hospital. Things like losing weight, etc., can also help. All of these things are helpful, and we definitely say do them all, but just see vaccination as one of that toolkit of things that you can do to protect yourself. If you want to have a vegan diet, if you want to have an ITEL diet, whatever you want to do, all of those things will help to protect you.
Somebody's asked a great question, and I think this is very valid. Wuhan is back to normal. What did they do different? And why have we got a third wave coming?
Yeah.
So
Is
I'll
Wuhan normal?
Say that again.
Hamish, go ahead.
yeah, I'll just touch on that. I'll touch on that briefly. So what the experience in Wuhan has shown that really, really strict lockdown has worked. So what China did was close the borders really, really early and went into really at the time, a lot of people viewed it as draconian measures in terms of their lockdown, in terms of restrictions on movements. But it has paid dividends because people have returned to a state of normalcy, despite the fact that the borders are still quite there for all intents and purposes closed. So I think they've just reopened their visa scheme to re-enter China. So what's happened is, and that experience has been replicated in somewhere like New Zealand, for instance, and I'm really proud to say that it's been replicated in a number of countries across the Caribbean as well. So again, it just shows the fact that and this can't happen, the same solution would work in every setting because every setting is unique. But there are a number of countries where they took really proactive measures early on in terms of border control, quarantine for arrivals, restricting arrivals, and implementing public health measures such as social distancing, testing, tracing, isolating very early on when the first initial cases were detected. So that's why countries are in a variable state, and yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that and why Wuhan is where they are now.
Thank you. I know we're getting on, and
Can I just add to Wuhan? I think it's really important to understand that China has a completely different governmental system to us. So the lockdowns weren't just strict; people were punished by disappearances and death if they broke lockdown. In addition to that, they have forced the vaccination policies. So you can't choose not to get a vaccination, and if you choose not to get the vaccination or you run away, the chances of disappearances are very high. So Wuhan comes at a great cost. So I think that if you're not willing to have the same human rights violations that existed in Wuhan, then I don't think it's a fair comparison.
Thanks. I've got a question here from Sandra as well to the panel. If we had the virus and our bodies have built up an immunity to the virus, why do we need to take the vaccine? And secondly, the CEO of Pfizer and Dr. Fauci has not taken the vaccine. Why should we, the public, take it if the experts are not taking it?
Who wants that one?
I don't know who wants to ask that one. And maybe we answered the first part anyway, so maybe it's about the second part, about the CEO of Pfizer not taking his own vaccine. And if he's not taking it, then why should the rest of us?
Well, I have to say, I'm not specifically aware of that, so that's new information to me. But there are lots of people who can't have vaccinations for various reasons. If they have certain underlying health conditions, they may not be appropriate to have vaccinations. So I don't know his medical records. There might be perfectly good reasons, if this is true, why somebody may not have had a vaccine. I think also overwhelmingly, in terms of healthcare professionals, people, scientists, immunologists, epidemiologists, I think it's pretty much unanimous across, I think, these sorts of cohorts and these sorts of people that people do support vaccination and have had the vaccines themselves. So you can, go and look on Google the BMA data. So that's the British Medical Association, and look at what percentage of doctors in the UK have been vaccinated. And it's pretty much all of them.
Okay. Desiree, who's been screaming and waving, I have to get the question in. Please, I ask again, may the doctors confirm or not that coronavirus has a 98% recovery rate? Anybody?
Is that, isn't it? That's for Dr. Hamish, I think.
So
Yeah,
I'm gonna again. I'll start up again. So what we do know is of all the people diagnosed with COVID-19, about 2% of them unfortunately die. But don't be lulled into a false sense of security. That proportion goes up to more than 10% when you go up to the older age groups. So I think we haven't published recovery rates because we don't follow up people over time to see how many are develop long COVID, for instance. So I think when you take into account the fact that there are, so these are approximations, right? So people with symptoms of COVID-19, about 80% will have that mild illness, that's fever, the loss of taste, sense of taste or smell, and a new persistent cough. They could also experience diarrhea, get a rash, and a number of other symptoms may arise. Then there's the rest of that group. The remainder will have severe or critical illness that will land them in hospital. Many of them will require ventilation, be in ICU. And as I mentioned, 2% will die. So I think it's an oversimplification to say that 98% recover, because a lot of the people that have COVID have enduring symptoms for a long time afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Somebody's asked in regards to, I'm not sure if you've answered this, so I do apologize. I might have been doing the poll at the time, about diabetes, and also if there are any ailments that make you immune from having the vaccine.
What did I mean by immune? I mean you shouldn't be a candidate for it?
As in somebody's asked, is there any kind of like ailment such as diabetes or some illness that will that you can't take the vaccine? They basically say, because I have to say, when I got asked today, I was asked if I was on any blood thinning tablets, and obviously I said no. So is there something that you if you've got an illness, a particular illness, that and reason why you can't actually have the vaccine?
I think, shall I answer that? I think the reality is there are very few other underlying illnesses which reduce, which essentially stop you from having the vaccine, especially the types of vaccines we have. However, if you do have comorbidities or you are worried, you can have a conversation with your general practitioner about it. We know that there is a risk, for example, with the Pfizer vaccine for people who have had previous anaphylaxis, and you should always see your doctor before you have the vaccination if you have to use an EpiPen and have serious allergies, essentially. But actually, the majority of medical conditions people can have the vaccine with. I think one of the things to say also in regards to that is the fact that there may be certain people who, because of their immune status, etc., might not mount as good a response to the vaccine as perhaps somebody who's otherwise young and healthy. But if you're unsure about anything that you may have, please just have a chat with your GP or your medical health professional or whoever. I think it's really important. But I think the majority, and there are different societies that represent different groups of people. For example, I don't know, like the RCOG, who look after pregnancy and young women, etc., have come out and said whether or not they think people should have the vaccine and stuff like that. So if you have something like, I don't know, diabetes or lupus or something like that, if you're unsure, have a chat with your GP, but also look at the specific societies that look after those various different ailments, and they'll be able to guide you. But I think as a whole, there are very few things that have. And I saw a comment that said actually Dr. Fauci and the Pfizer CEO had the vaccine as well. I mean, I was pretty sure that was the case anyway, but I was just trying to Google it myself. I think it's important to note that some of these people probably didn't have the vaccine straight away because of the fact that actually, a little bit like Hamish here, frontline workers were at the forefront, and those who were very elderly were at the forefront of vaccination. So it's important to note that there is a priority system. And I guess in some places what's happened is MPs, etc., have gone ahead and had the vaccine to show trust, but actually they've jumped the queue. So I think that's another thing to say. Actually, do you want like kind of big name people having the vaccine for you to see them? Or do you want actually the people who really need the vaccine to get the vaccine first? And my opinion is that the people who really need the vaccine should get the vaccine first. So yeah,
it's like a chicken and egg situation, especially when you're rich and famous. You know, it's kind of difficult. Although they did recruit a lot of famous people to try and build up the demand for the vaccine. So you know, but listen,
there was a question.
Can I just state? There's a couple of things I just want to make sure that we state again. Nobody on this program that I'm aware of, and if there is, then the person can answer if they are. Nobody's been paid to come on to talk about coronavirus today. There's no funding being given to this platform. on behalf of this program. So if you think we've been given money, we have not.
I wish. I really wish.
Right. So let's just.
I'm sure you don't, but it's okay. Goodness of your heart.
There's another 2 questions I want to ask. Where has the flu gone? Because people are saying they haven't heard anything about the flu. And I think the next one that someone put in is the death rate of people dying within 28 days of taking the vaccine. Is there any data on that?
So two things. So I'll start up on the question was about flu. So the flu is caused by a different virus from COVID-19, and it's not as infectious as COVID-19. So what we've seen is the social distancing measures that have been introduced to combat COVID-19, they have had an effect on COVID-19, but it had a bigger effect on influenza. So for most of this year, there haven't been any confirmed cases of influenza. And that is highly unusual in a normal year, but because we're in a situation where we're in lockdown, we're doing a number of social distancing practices, we're using face coverings in enclosed spaces, that has had a greater protective effect on transmission of influenza. And the second thing about the deaths after in people who've been vaccinated, what I'm going off of memory here, but within 4 weeks of the peak of the first wave, amongst 80-plus-year-olds that have the greatest risk of dying, there was a 46% reduction in deaths. Now, when we look at the second wave that took place from December into January, that proportion after 4 weeks after the peak, is more like an 80% reduction in deaths. So there is a huge impact on deaths already. And in fact, just earlier this week, some estimates were published by Public Health England that show that based on the first 3 months of the vaccination program, just over 6,000 deaths have been averted because of vaccination. So again, there's clear evidence that's emerging in this real world setting to show that vaccination works, is having beneficial impacts. But my concern is that if different segments of society, Black and brown communities, if we're not getting vaccinated as often, or as our coverage is not as high as other communities, we will not have that benefit like other communities.
Thank you so much.
There was a question that was asked earlier on, but I don't think we got the satisfactory answer. Ethylene oxide. Our kids are taking it in the swab test when they go to school. Is there any risk to the kids who are taking the swab test using ethylene oxide?
Dr. Sarah?
I can answer that one. I've seen this video, so I know a little bit about this. I've seen the video that's going on around about ethylene oxide. So just a little bit of context for my fellow panelists, because they may not have seen the video, but essentially there's a video going around that looks at kind of the lateral flow tests that the children have been given out in schools, etc., or that we're using at home as healthcare workers. And it shows that the swab used is a sterilized swab, as you would expect. And essentially the commentator on it talks about the fact that the swab itself has been sterilized in ethylene oxide, and then goes on to like the CDC website, etc., and looks at the dangerous effects of ethylene oxide. So the first thing to say is that it's important when you run any kind of DNA test or any kind of swab test that you have kind of, what's the word? Like a pure sample or whatever. So you can't allow people to use swabs that are not sterilized or are not clean. So the process of sterilizing anything, and this goes for all medical equipment, uses certain different chemicals. But the important thing is it's a process. So as part of the process, one of the steps in the process is to use ethylene oxide, which will kill off various different viruses, whatever. But then there's another process that kind of gets rid of that and aerates it in order that the equipment that you then use is not harmful to the person or whoever. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted. I think that's the video specifically that people are talking about, and I've seen it myself and had to essentially explain that to other people. But I mean, you can look it up if you want. There is information about, I mean, I don't know why we're now all kind of experts in sterilization and like, you know, all of these different processes that like nobody ever really cared about before. But yeah, that's kind of where that's come from. But the long and short of it is that the swabs themselves are not harmful, and they've just gone through a process to ensure that actually they're sterile and will not give you kind of false results.
Thanks for that, Doctor. I just got one. Let me just answer. Let me just put this question to you from Alison Walcott. She says for the 20th time of asking, and I'm not sure if she has asked for it for 20 times or not. Given that 80 to 90% of the adult population are to receive the vaccine, why would it be necessary to vaccinate school-aged children? And the second part of her question is: does the vaccine replace your body's natural immune system with a synthetic one? If yes, is this temporary, reversible, or irreversible? So I don't know who wants to pick up that one.
Maybe answer about the children.
Yeah, the children. I guess the question there is about, I guess, this whole thing about herd immunity. So, and Hamish should correct me if I say anything wrong, but as I understand it, I think it's worth saying specifically about children that obviously early on there was this big fear that children were asymptomatic carriers, and the data is quite clear. Children do not really get as severe as adults do. The data is really, really clear, and they don't really die from it. And the question used to be that maybe they don't die from it, but they're just like this sort of super spreaders doing damage with their sort of grottiness as children do. But actually, there's some good data coming out, or has come out, showing that actually children, thankfully, are not the super spreaders that we thought they were, or the reservoirs. You know, if you look at the teachers, because obviously, and rightly so, there was a lot of concern that teachers were not being offered to be in the front line. They're saying that why not though? But then actually, certainly from a Scottish data and looking around that, you know, teachers, if anything, were less likely to get the teachers of school age, particularly, were less likely to get COVID compared to other groups of the population. So that's one blessing that this pandemic has brought with it, if any at all. And I think so. It's worth saying that actually, you know, children, we must protect them definitely, but you know, they're not going to be the severe ones. So, as far as I'm aware, there's no sort of mandated sort of program to vaccinate all school-age children. Certainly the ones with the high risk, and my college, the College of Pediatrics, has set out strict criteria for the children that you would offer the vaccine to. But encouragingly, even the ones that have severe illnesses, you know, I look after a group of children that have chronic bowel problems. And even those ones who are on immune medications, they don't really get serious COVID. So I think actually there won't be many children who will qualify for the COVID vaccine unless something drastic changes, which hopefully will not be the case. But yeah, I don't know if my other panelists want to jump in there.
No, that's fine. I'm just going to ask the question because I've got one more question to ask you guys. Can I just say to the people who are on Facebook and YouTube, after hearing our learned friends talk, would you now be more inclined to take the vaccine or less? So you've heard the experts talk, you've had a bit of while to make up some of your mind, so you could say yes or no, or your opinion hasn't changed. That's fine. You could say yes, no, or haven't changed. Either one of those you can put into the chat room. We'd just like to see.
Okay, should I give them the result from the previous poll first, or just wait?
No, wait.
Wait. Yeah, you might bias.
Yeah.
But if
so
they
I'm gonna be missing for a bit. I'm gonna keep my eye on here
on the screen.
If they put no change, they should say whether it's still yes or no as well, because otherwise you won't know what they've not changed from.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Sandra Thomas says, please can the Platts panel explain this official statement? As of 19th of March 2021, that must be, she's putting 2020, it's 2021, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease, HCID in brackets, in the UK. The Four Nations Public Health HCID group made an interim recommendation in January 2020. It says 2020. I'm not sure if it's 2020 or 2021 they need to classify COVID-19 as an HCID. This was based on consideration of the UK HCID criteria about the virus and the disease, with information available during the early stages of the outbreak. It is no longer a high consequence infection. Can someone, first of all, tell us what HCID means?
High consequence infectious disease.
Okay, thank you. So can you go on to explain the rest of it?
So, this is kind of a technicality that, so essentially within the UK, infectious diseases is split up into different kind of units, and there aren't actually that many kind of high consequence infectious disease departments or units. I think there are something like two in London, 3 or 4 across the rest of England and the UK. And what these are essentially units set up specifically to deal with infections such as one that everybody will have heard of and known of, Ebola, prior to this, MERS and SARS. And these are specialist units that have special rooms, cubicles. Often they will have what we call negative pressure rooms, or they may even have kind of bubble chambers where people can be fully isolated from the outside world, and in order to protect the healthcare workers from the infection of high consequence. So that's essentially where that definition comes from. So I think actually the date she was talking about is 2020, because last year when COVID was first kind of isolated and first arrived on our shores, it was seen as a high consequence infection. And what that meant was that there was kind of the highest level of infection control precautions used. And this was something that was actually made life quite tricky for people who had possible COVID, because what it meant is that they couldn't do things like they couldn't go on public transport, they had to be ferried around in special ambulances. People used to have to wear full protective equipment. So there's a picture of me somewhere kind of early on in the pandemic where I'm in full PPE because I had to meet somebody who'd come back into the country from one of the countries that were at that point on the high consequence or risk group in terms of, I think it was probably Italy or China or something like that. So kind of early on in the pandemic. But then I think as the infection became more endemic and widespread, they realized that actually a lower level of protective equipment was needed unless certain procedures were being done. So those procedures we call aerosol generating procedures. And they're things, for example, like when somebody is intubated, so that means when they have a tube put down their mouth to help them breathe, because there's a risk that the infection from there can spray up and be aerosolized. It includes various other kind of procedures that could cause that, sometimes nebulization, sometimes if people are having CPR, etc. So that's kind of where that distinction came from. But actually, essentially, the infection was downgraded. So that's what it means.
Okay. So when we hear Boris Johnson encourage workers to go back, to come out of their house and go back to work, do you agree with that? Dr. Sarah?
Well,
so you can get away with it.
It's a tricky one. I mean, I'm thankful I'm not a policymaker or a politician, because it means that, like, you know, the majority of my standpoint on this is from a healthcare point of view. I think, unfortunately, at the moment, we still have quite high levels of infection within the community. And the risk with high levels of infection is not just the fact that obviously more people will become infected and come unwell, but it's also a risk of the fact that you could get more variants of concern. So one of the reasons we're pushing for vaccination so hard here and globally, and I think it's really important to state that I think it's really important for vaccine uptake to be high across the world, because if we have an increase in variants of concern, and that's variants like the one that originated in South Africa or the one that originated in Kent, or more worryingly, the one that has originated in South America, so the strain in Brazil. I think if anybody really wants to understand what it's like when you have very high levels of virus in your community, and you have a high level of mutation, and you have low vaccine uptake, just look at Brazil. Just Google it. Look at what's going on with COVID in Brazil at the moment. It's really hard to see, because Brazil as a system is a very highly developed country. And actually, although, yes, we all know Brazil has its problems, especially when it comes to minorities such as ourselves. But as a whole, they have a very good system. And unfortunately, what's happened there is they've had an increase in this variant that is more transmissible, not quite good and not quite good enough vaccine uptake. And with that, they and also a variant that possibly isn't as responsive to the vaccine, as well as probably not also protected by previous infection. So that's another problem. I mean, so there are these multiple problems which has essentially led to what is possibly going to be an absolute public health disaster. I mean, COVID already is in many places of the world, but I'm really worried about South America. I'm going to be honest.
So you'd say we should take it. We should be very careful about going back to work. Yes.
Very much so. Very much so. Sorry.
Can I ask Dr. Krista? And I don't know whether this is true or not, but Alison asks, weddings return on April 12th. But a new government rule means that brides and grooms aren't allowed to kiss if they haven't been living together. Is this absurd or not?
I'm not aware of that rule, and I mean, we're having weddings all year with restricted people. Obviously, no weddings apart from very special circumstances during this lockdown, and I'm not aware of any restriction on.
Would you advocate that if couples ain't been living together and they're getting married? Would you say?
And they're getting married. I would certainly advocate that you kiss your husband or your bride. Absolutely, yes. Because I presume there's a lot that's going to follow on after that. So, I mean, why stop them at the wedding? So, yes, I'm sure that's perfectly fine.
Thank you, Dr. Krista. Reggie, can we go to you for some of the polls and what have people been saying in the chat?
Okay, all right. So in regards to the poll, can you give me exactly 30 seconds? Because I need to just collate the last ones. I was just trying to give as many people as much time as possible to put in yes or no. Okay, so let me just do that. Carry the one on here.
Well, while you're doing that, can I just thank the panel for coming on? And when we talk about in this year, when everything's been happening and Black Lives Matter, and we've been looking at people to stand up and be counted amongst our community. I just want to give applause to Black excellence tonight. It's good to see people like you are accessible, and whatever people may think, whatever they want to choose, you're here giving up your time because you're passionate not only about life but about our community as well. So we just like to thank you because sometimes I go off on a ramble after I say hi and thanks. So I just want to do that now, so we just get that out the way. So thank you very much for giving up your time to come on to Set the Trend podcast. It's been valuable and insightful for me, and I've learned a few fair things tonight. What's that? Oh, big up Jerry. Big up your manager's in the building. Reggie, so you best be on your best behavior.
Which manager?
Yours, Jerry Baston.
I don't have no manager. Oh, okay.
Good evening, Jerry Baston.
Go on, Reggie.
Right, okay. So obviously, can I just reiterate, this is not a official poll of science. It is very unscientific, and we can't get a extremely accurate detail, because obviously we've asked the poll at 2 different times, but we don't know if it's the same people that have responded or not, and some people might have dropped off the podcast who didn't get a chance to actually say what they were saying. But in regards to the first poll, 57% of people said no, and 28% of people said yes. 15% of that sample said that they'd already taken it. So roughly, you could say that 43% of people have either going to take the vaccine or have taken it already. So 15% of that 43% are people who said that they've already taken the vaccine and said yes, they will take it. 28%, no, 57%. So I hope that's clear. And that's from a sample size of 38 people. The next sample size is 29 people. And this is very interesting, and people are going to be shocked. Are you ready for a moment of theatre? Drum roll. No, 72% saying no, they will not take the vaccine. Yes, 8% of people, obviously. I'm sorry, I'm talking about 27% of people said that they will not take the vaccine. Sorry, 28% of people said they will said that they will take the vaccine. I do apologize. I think I've taken the vaccine today, and you know they said that he started to get tired. I think that's so just to clarify, no 72%, yes 28%, but we'll say there are different people who might have dropped off who actually did mention in the poll earlier. So you know, I don't know if we've achieved anything more at all, but maybe what we have is just a lot of the naysayers who are still sticking around to try and find out some more information for them to get out and get jabbed. So you know, if I've got to definitely say that I've taken it. I'm okay. I am slightly tired, and that is one of the side effects that will happen apparently. But I am fine. I've got all the limbs. Everything's working. I'm not sure about one particular part. We'll have to find out in June when I take my second dose. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Reggie. As I said, I thank the doctors for being part of this. As again, your presence, your knowledge is greatly appreciated. So thank you, Dr. Atta, Dr. Crystal, and Dr. Sarah. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming on to Set the Trend podcast.
Fantastic.
Thank you. So, Nadine, I'm going to leave the last words with you because you are the lady that put all this together, and you brought the A team. I don't care what anybody thinks. This is the A team. And what do you say? What do you think? We've had 2 shows now, so what do you think we've got out of it? And what would be your last word to people who may not have moved in any direction and who may not want to take the vaccine?
I think that the show wouldn't have been possible unless when I came to you, you gave us a platform. So this was a completely joint effort. And I think that what it showed that is that as a community, as a broader community, our interests are fundamentally aligned, irrespective of the value that we bring to our families, our homes at any given time. So I think that it was an excellent example of what happens when people unite and they come together for a common cause, and it galvanized us to do something great. And what we did was provide information to people that otherwise didn't have access to it. And we provide clinicians and medical professionals to people that may not have otherwise had access to them. And I think it's really important to note that everybody on the panel really played down their expertise. Dr. Hamish is the person that collates all of the information for Public Health England, and anything the government reports on comes from his desk. Anything the media reports on comes from his desk. Krista is not just a neurologist. She does neurologist policy. She's so up there in the neurology, I can't even explain it. But she's a senior clinician in neurology in this country. And there are so few doctors that work on trials generally. And Dr. Sarah Ann Filson is one of the few Black doctors that is doing that globally. And Dr. Atta is a baby doctor. He's the person that has to learn how to speak not using his voice. He has to be able to look at a child and touch that child's stomach and be able to tell everybody what's wrong with it. And so being a Black man as well, and being a minority within his profession, having to convince people that otherwise might think he's a criminal and an illegal immigrant to let them touch his child is really significant. And everybody came today because they believe in what they do and they believe in us, and they realize the disparities, and they just want to give us the best chance of survival. So whatever decision people make, just know that you're not in this alone. and that even though you don't always see us in your regular sphere of life, there are hundreds of people like us across the UK that exist, just like EastEnders, just like Reggie, just like Vibes, just like Jay, just like Jide, that want the best for us. I think that I believe in herd immunity. I don't want to take the vaccine, but I'm going to take the vaccine because I live in Lewisham, for those of you that don't know, and I live in a community that doesn't seem like it wants to get vaccinated and develop herd immunity. And we are going to have a pandemic in Lewisham for years to come, it seems like. So our options are limited. People are just going to have to die for us to develop herd immunity, or eventually we're going to get vaccinated to develop herd immunity. And I don't particularly want to go to any more funerals, but that just looks like where we're going at the moment. And so we're just going to dead off. I'm hoping that that's not going to be the case, but based on the decisions that people are making, that's likely to be what happens. And I'm not sorry if people are offended by what I'm saying, because all of the data points to that. I'll be happy to come back if we don't all die and say, well, I was wrong and I'm really sorry. Maybe if you see me in Lewisham, you can cuss me. But the data doesn't suggest that. If we don't get vaccinated, disproportionate numbers of us are going to die. The people that you think are healthy, even yourselves, the people that you think should be able to survive because of their diet or they don't have any underlying health conditions, the data does not support that. And I'm sad. I'm actually sad. I'm happy that we were able to do this and we were able to provide the service, but I'm also sad that more people are going to die and I'm going to have to go to more Zoom funerals. And those people will probably be within my family. And I just think that we have a greater responsibility to ourselves and our families to ensure our survival. And we have to make this choice. This choice can't be made for us. So I'm just hoping.
Can I say thank you for bringing such, as DJ Khaled would call it, special cloth on to set the trend, you know, and, you know, by set the trend by nature, by name, we had some great doctors. I thoroughly enjoyed the explanations. Sarah, standout star. A lot of people mentioned about Dr. Sarah and her explanations, and just everybody really. Obviously, there were a few bones of contention here and there, but that's what we're here to do, which is to just give people information, and that's it. Can you tell people about kind of like the Cambridge Union University, ACS, and where they can find the myth-busting bits and pieces and more of what you're doing?
Yes, so I'm a graduate of Cambridge University, as was most of the panel, and we are a intergenerational group of graduates that support each other. We network, we provide services. This is our first public health campaign around COVID, but we also offer educational services to young people who might like to submit applications to elite universities, not just Cambridge University, but just providing general support as and when it's needed. So if people have a particular need, they think we can service, like, I don't know, my child wants to be a lawyer, or my child wants to be a climate change scientist, or anything, any service academically or professionally, we provide it. And part of that is mentorship, and which is really important in our communities, because you might have a child that's extremely bright, or maybe isn't that bright, but you just need them to have access to people that might not be in your general cohort. And we provide that service too, to have somebody outside of people's traditional networks, which is really important, because when I wanted to be a lawyer, I didn't know any Black lawyers. I didn't know any. When I was asking for support or finding people that could help me understand what was required, there was nobody.
Not even Sean Wallace.
Which Sean did there? No, not for me. No, not for me. I mean, they didn't exist. And even when I did read law, but even when I changed to journalism, the two Black journalists that I spoke to were so hostile and were so mean to me that if I didn't have enough grit inside me, I would have just gone on to do something else. And we just want to provide services in an environment where anybody can come, irrespective of how they present themselves, how they dress, how they speak, the type of families that they come from, whether or not they have money or no money, and be able to just say, this is possible. but it's only going to be possible if you kind of do these things. Well, not only.
Nadine, do you know what? I think in years that I've been working, this has always been one of the main questions about your network, and I still don't think we've got it as a community yet, that your network is your worth. You know what I'm saying to you? You tapping in to your network, to people who are in places where they can help you up, and they are willing to keep that door open for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tap into those people, then your lives, your friends, your uncles, your aunties, your nieces, your nephews, they will have an easier life than what we've had. And I think we're still, you know, it's still hard for people to comprehend that. And that is one of the sad things about it. But maybe, you know, seeing shows like this, there's other shows out there that are doing stuff and people are collaborating together. Hopefully, you know, if there's one thing that this pandemic has done, it's made Black people collaborate more together, which is something we was not doing. So that is one of the good things that has come out of the pandemic, and hopefully something that we will continue.
I think so. And there's one more thing I'll add as well, is that there isn't one type of Black person, and we shouldn't be expected to all represent or show up in the same way. And so within ourselves, we discriminate against each other if we speak a bit differently or dress a bit differently or have different interests as not being real. And we're all real because melanin is real, and we all have experiences based on the level of melanin we have in our skin. But some of us do have different interests, and some of us associate or identify differently, but it doesn't stop us from being Black. And I think that going forward, particularly after COVID, we should perhaps be a little bit less judgmental. Somebody had said in the comments, you know, we not trust Uno. Who's Uno? We are Uno. We're all the same, but different, but the same.
Mm.
And
you know what's so funny? Sorry, yeah. Go on. Sorry.
No, so we're all different, but we're the same. And this idea that you've got only particular types of Black people that can be Black is really limiting, because what that does is it closes networks. You
know what's so funny? People work hard, and there are a lot of people who work hard and they have aspirations for their kids to be able to do what you've done, which is to graduate from Cambridge or Oxford or Marlborough, one of these, you know, really prestige universities. And when they actually leave and come out into society and come back into the community, some people seem to have this mistrust because they speak differently, they may behave differently, their mannerisms are different, but deep down you are still the person you are. And I just don't understand that. You know, what's the point in, you know, wanting your kids to go to such a great institution, and then when they come back with the knowledge to help the community, you're then rebuffed in that way. So, you know, I really appreciate you coming back on to set the trend and speaking to the community, because I think that is a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. But just be aware that any decision you make to not take the vaccine will impact your communities in ways you can't imagine or foresee yet. But also know there'll be an economic impact. Will it affect your school closures? Your kids won't be able to go to school. Small businesses will close down because there will be mini lockdowns in communities. And it will devastate, not just on a health level, but on a social and economic level as well. And when you're looking at the rates of domestic violence, you're looking at the rates of abuse of children, drug intake increases, alcoholism increases. It doesn't bode well for a community that already lives under extreme pressure in this country. So this is not just about the vaccine; it's about all of the other impacts if we do not develop herd immunity.
Thanks a lot, Nadine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine.
Guys.
Thanks for being
The clocks are about to go forward.
Okay, all right.
No, at 1 o'clock. Stop frightening them, Rich. And we hope we'll see you on again, Nadine. We'll hope you be a guest in the future as well. Okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nadine.
See you later.
Thank you. You know what? If anybody told me a year ago that we'd be doing a podcast, and of course we do music, street sounds are our specialism, but we'd be doing a podcast and we'd be coming out our comfort zone, I would have said never. No, because I firmly believe music is my passion. I do have I do other things outside. I've done other things outside for years, but I never really wanted to cross the two, and I thought that was for somebody else to do. But I don't think we've done quite a bad job, lads.
It's not been bad at all, and I think we wouldn't be anything without the level or the special cloth that we had on the show today, who were able to literally answer everything to the best of their ability, but also give some great information. And I think it's one of these podcasts that you have to go back and watch again. You have to share with your friends.
That's
and
exactly
say,
what I was going to say.
This. You have to subscribe to set the trend, because we got that special cloth.
There's a point. Subscribe, Facebook and on YouTube. Subscribe and follow the channel. You're talking about friends. You're talking about friends. And we're talking about what makes this show so special, but what also makes the show this special and makes sure that we're here every week is the people in the chat room, the contributions that you make. It really is a two-way conversation most weeks, and we love the way that you guys get involved. Like, you're on a little bit on the cuffs of trying to bully, because I see you trying to bully me there right now. Like, you want to kick me off as well and get that weatherman on from GMT TV and all. I mean, I've been putting in the work here.
Alex Beresford.
But the thing is that the show wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't without them, would it, EastEnder?
Yeah. All right. Should we tell him what's happening next week then?
I just. All right, cool.
Oh, it's coming up to 1 a.m.
Oh my God!
It's coming up to 2 a.m.
All right, forget EastEnder's contribution then.
Sorry.
But producers, we have
the effects. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Producers, can we have the flyer in for next week, please? Because Reggie's getting uppity.
Relax now.
Yeah, cool on, brother. What I'm to you? Producers, is there any producers in the? Oh, thank you. 10 minutes later. Anyway, here we are. Next week we have the award-winning Garage Classics, and he's shown he is a connoisseur of classic music as well. Over the lockdown, where I've seen the other side to DJ Spoonie, where he's been playing a lot of our style, a lot of soul, a lot of rare groove, a lot of 80s boogies that has been in there. Anyway, we'll be talking to him next week, Saturday, and as I said before, you think you might know a lot about DJ Spoonie, but we'll be talking a lot more, especially around certain things, like as I said before, how he first booked Mystery for a gig when he was 16, Maxims, and also his sound that he had from early doors, as he would say, and he's a Liverpool supporter, so we'll be too up on the Arsenal.
Yeah, and you can catch him on the after breakfast blues as well.
After breakfast blues, I think he's back because I think he's moving house. And we have the founder and CEO of Motor Racing's Next Generation Racing, Carol Glenn. Tell us just a bit about Carol Glenn, Reggie.
Yeah, Carol Glenn. She just created the first black-owned. It's called NRG, so it's Next Racing Generation, and they're looking for 16 plus from the community, from diverse backgrounds as well, to join their organization. Or also, if there's anybody who has any expertise in some way, who might be able to come on board and help, she'll be doing it. Carol was actually watching today earlier on, so thank you to Carol and for popping in and saying hello. So looking forward to speaking to her next week. I think Lewis Hamilton today qualified second after Max Verstappen on the Bahrain Grand Prix today. So big up. Oh yeah, yes.
And also someone put in there about Mr. White.
Yeah, TKO.
A technical knockout. So well done, Dylan White. And he's one of our own. He's a Brixtonian. So
yeah, there would have been a big party.
He's a
Everybody would have been partying down at Rum Kitchen tonight if we weren't on lockdown.
So and also the last person on there is a definitely one of our own street anthems, EastEnder.
UK soul singer, Mr. Sinclair, who has a massive 90s street sound anthem, obviously called I Want You Back, and has other songs that he's so looking forward to talking about next week. And he says not many people know a lot about him, so he's really excited to come on the show next week and discuss his career and what he does as an artist, a producer, a songwriter. So yes, he's definitely looking forward to coming on there next week.
Big up Sinclair.
Big up Sinclair. The week after we have Rory from Stone Love. He will be in the building, and we'll be talking to him about his affiliation with Street Sounds. And if you didn't know that Rory Stone Love had any affiliation with Street Sounds, you will by the time that we finish next week. He's played with some of our iconic Street Sound systems, Toucher Class, Booker T. The list. There's a fair few of lists right there that he's played with, and we'll be talking about some of the iconic places we used to rave, like Warehouse back in New Cross, where I first laid my eyes on Rory from Stone Love playing to us. So we'll be talking to him, and then a week after that we have DJ Elaine, formerly from LWR, one of the best known female DJs, and we'll be talking to her about her life.
Yeah, she's done a lot.
What do you mean? She in a male-dominated world.
Yep, she's done a lot.
Remember that. In a male-dominated world, she stood out and she went places. And we'll be talking to DJ Lane in a couple of weeks. And we'll also have Nathan, cute guy, who used to make, I think he's still making adverts as it goes.
Yeah, I heard one the other day.
Street Sounds, most of the Street Sounds adverts back in the day. You had Mark Ross, you had Robbo Ranks. Used to do him as well. You had Mike Anthony and you had cute guy Nathan who
and he ended my voiceover career, mate. I was doing so well. I was starting to get some great gigs.
So we will have him up as well in that week, and then the week after we're hoping for something very special. So we keep you tuned for that. Yeah. So EastEnder, what are you up to this week, mate?
I'm gonna meet after this show. Me and Reggie's gonna have a conversation. We're gonna be producing the Breakfast Blues for tomorrow. So discussions, what we're gonna bring to the show tomorrow, because you're not answering it in the chat. Yeah. So first of all,
I don't know why. Right, keep out my business. That's what you don't need to do. Keep out my business. Yeah, all you lot in the chat ask patty questions.
Reggie and Michael Jackson.
So no.
April the 12th, non-essential shops.
Why they want to know your business? You don't owe me. You don't owe me. You don't owe me. Like, leave me to be. Leave me to be.
April the 12th, non-essential shops are reopening. So Maestro Records will be opening on the 12th of April. So I'm going to start preparing for reopening on April the 12th.
Can I do
it on Tuesday? Facebook Live, 10 p.m. till 1 a.m. Soul Explosion.
Yeah, and tomorrow I'll be doing my radio show on London Soul Radio, obviously, and then from 8 till 10 p.m. slow jams, your mellow grooves, all that good, nice, lovely tunes. So, and then also on Monday, London Soul Radio again, 3 to 6 p.m. And can I also mention Friday from 7 p.m. Myself, D. Demure, S. Campbell will do a thing called Virtual Night In. So make sure you go check it out. Virtual Night In. NITE, and we've got the amazing special edition joining us again. Ricky D from Special Edition will be joining us again, playing some tunes. So the last one was a laugh, and we just have a bit of fun, because we used to do a night called the Soul Night Out down at the White Lion. So we decided to do the Soul Night In. So big up to D and
so that.
Over to the the award nominee award, Mr.
Let us know. Give us. Yeah, that's the question. What's going on in the Situation Room tomorrow?
Yeah. So what's the Situation Room?
The Situation Room.
We're hanging on to.
It isn't chatty patty about what DJs are up to or not. That is nope. We're not discussing any of that, and we're not discussing Action Jackson, whatever his name is. We're not discussing any of that. We have another dilemma.
They're going to bully you and they're going to discuss it.
They're not. Well, they can discuss. Listen, they own the chat room. They can discuss what they like. I just will not be discussing it. Remember, we're on 4 platforms, so I broadcast to different people, and not all them platforms are connected. So, Instagram, Twitch, and Mixcloud Pro, and Facebook. Only Facebook and Twitch are connected. I don't think Mixcloud Pro might be, but Instagram definitely not. Anyway, you get more decent people on Instagram anyway, to be honest with you. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm always on Instagram. We got Sandra, all the regulars.
Instagram are nice to me, you know what I mean? It's only the ones on Facebook chat.
I got to big up there's a couple of people, just a couple of names who have been listening before we log off. Alison Walcott, thank you, some great questions. Tracy Angel, amazing questions. Pamela Allen, Cheryl Sterling, Prue, Biscuit, the original enforcer. Big up to you, and thanks for tuning in. Anybody else? Jake Davidson.
Listen. Stop using this platform to curry favor with them, because they will turn on you with the quickness. Yeah, you just don't know.
Until then, I will take their hands. I'll take their love with open arms. Until then,
2 hours and 50 minutes. Set the Trend podcast. Damn,
it's almost 2 a.m.
Subscribe. Oh yeah, subscribe to the channels, please. Our YouTube channel, especially, because if Facebook bans us, then we always have YouTube, and YouTube is a bit more flexible. So Set the Trend podcast on YouTube. Please go and subscribe and follow. All right, okay. So lads, we're out of here.
Clocks go forward in an hour.
In 10 minutes.
In an hour. They go forward at 1 a.m.
The clocks go forward in 10 minutes, and then it's 2 o'clock, and I've got to get my beauty sleep in. So I will see you guys later. Have a good day. Thank you for being part of it, and thanks to the Black Excellence panel
Krista,
that we had on today.
Atta,
it was very inspiring.
Nadine.
And definitely inspired the inspired. Set the Trend podcast. We're out. Jide and Jay. Thank you, our producers. Peace. Bye bye.